But you saw that discontent that people felt with Hillary Clinton expressed among Democratic voters and also the nonpartisan voters who are allowed to vote in the presidential primary here. So, in some ways we saw that back in June. Hillary Clinton's support was broad, but maybe not so deep.
And Scott, that raises a very good point. It's what we've been talking about around this table tonight, and that is just where is Hillary Clinton's support coming from, and how enthusiastic is it? I mean, clearly, in some places where her campaign was counting on and where the party was counting on, it's not there.
It's not there. And, they were very confident of their ground game, Judy. The Get Out the Vote effort was basically inherited from the 2012 Obama campaign. Many of the same people worked on the precinct operations and a very sophisticated use of data to target voters. They knew exactly who they needed to get to the polls. I think there were obviously some concerns about the level of enthusiasm, especially among African-American voters. The thought was that she could make up for that with more votes from Latinos. But I think perhaps, as you've been discussing, what was missed is the elevated support and enthusiasm for Donald Trump among working class white folks and Caucasians without a college education.
Scott Schaefer with KQED. I've got to get that first letter right. KQED, public television station in San Francisco. Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we are left with, yes, Hillary Clinton has won California, Mark Shields, but the final result, we don't know yet.
We don't know. It certainly is more suspenseful than many of us expected it would be.
Sure.
But, we are in the heart of post-industrial America, if you think about Wisconsin and Michigan. And that really is where America has changed probably more dramatically economically. And the irony, of course, is that Barack Obama in 2012 did so well in both Michigan and Ohio because of the auto bailout.
Right.
And
and being able to portray Romney as
some
plutocrat.
As somebody who had written a piece in the New York Times saying that there ought to be a managed bankruptcy of the auto industry. That's the reality. I mean, it's a changed reality. We could, the one point that Stewart made that I want to underline is that politics is the most imitative of all human activities, with the possible exception of political journalism. And it is, he has legitimized speech that was totally unacceptable and considered unhelpful and counterproductive and hurtful. I mean, it wasn't that people were necessarily more noble, but that was considered speech that would be damaging to you politically. And there'll be 1,000 Donald Trumps running from everything from county recorder to library board starting Monday morning.
One of the things that's actually really interesting about this is that if you look at the age-race breakdown, this is not terribly unusual to see white millennials break Republican. But in this race, I don't think people assumed that that was going to happen, and it does. So Trump gets a plurality of that vote. There are still some that are going to be going off on the third-party candidates, but you assume that the younger generation is going to be more socially liberal on all matters. That may not be true.
Does that mean these were Sanders voters? Were these Sanders voters, or were they? Is that? Can we tell?
Well, we didn't.
Obama
We didn't wipe
But that's what Clinton. The very last Clinton campaign call was, we're outperforming with white millennials. Obama lost them. We're winning them. We're outperforming with Latinos. We're outperforming with Asians. We're outperforming with white suburban
What were they
voters.
basing that on?
They were basing it on what they were seeing in the early vote and what they were seeing in their own
But they're
polling.
not. I mean, to me, the storyline really here is, if you look at his percentages, I mean, they're not that far off of Mitt Romney's. They came back in line. She has not held the Obama coalition the way a lot of us thought she would.
David Brooks, there was a commentator in one of Jeff Brown's pieces, I think it was a pollster in Iowa, that said, for the last 12 years, I've been hearing people want a candidate, sometimes by name, like this.
This is Ann Seltzer,
the
pollster in Iowa.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to go back and see what just happened. I mean, there's the pollster story, which is the fascinating story. There's just the history story with the mention of Brexit Brexit was like the Spanish-American War compared to World War I. This is a much bigger global
Yep.
story.
Yep.
This is a gigantic
Yep.
global story.
Yep.
And America's role in the world is going to change if Trump wins. And
Yep.
I'm still not certain. I can see a lot of path, or at least one path for Clinton to pull this out. But Obamacare, gone. A lot of the immigration policy utterly transformed. So a lot of big things are about to happen in this country if Trump wins. And why people elected him is, to me, actually, that's something we're going to argue about, but just projecting forward, trying to think we have to now widen our horizons of what American future is about to look like in the next 5 years. And it's going to be a lot of things. The Democratic Party, believe me, has not thought about this. I don't think anybody really had a scenario for a Trump presidency.
there's a
Maybe
big-
I'm wrong, but I certainly didn't hear about
I
it.
mean, there's that argument that we've heard. I've interviewed a number of authors on the NewsHour who've looked at the white working class swath of America and come at it in many different directions. J.D. Vance, who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, there have been others. But the
Berkeley.
thrust of it is that the Democratic Party was not paying attention to the white working class people of America. That's a great overstatement, and I don't want to overstate it, but there's something going on out there this year.
Look, we could give us all those minutes to think about the future of America as we head up to the newsroom. William Brangham, Daniel Bush, you've been following the ballot initiatives. You've been following a lot of things throughout the night.
Understood. Good evening. I'm William Brangham. Again, I'm here with Daniel Bush, who is the digital politics editor. We've been following this story as this has been unfolding, as it seems that Donald Trump is edging closer and closer to the nomination. We've been trying to see, how is this being followed on social media? What are people saying about this? And Dan, you've been looking particularly at what liberals, what Democrats have been saying. What have you been seeing?
So this is not the night that they were expecting, William. Hillary Clinton came in with a advantage in national polls in some battleground states. Now you have Democrats on social media who really seem despondent. You have Shonda Rhimes, the producer of Scandal and other television shows, who campaigned with Hillary Clinton in Philadelphia just 2 days ago. She sent out a tweet saying, "Really, people? Anyone can be president, anyone." You have Katrina vanden Heuvel, the editor of The Nation magazine, saying, "Tomorrow, more than soul-searching demanded among pollsters, media elites." So clearly, Hillary Clinton supporters are very surprised right now about what's going on.
Indeed. We've also saw this photograph that was put up by Ivanka Trump. This is of the Trump family watching results, and perhaps their faces depict what a lot of people in the country are feeling right now, which is a sense of awe and shock at the story and how it's unfolding. We heard from some other prominent conservatives that we've seen them on Twitter as well. Bill Kristol, who is a conservative writer and editor of the Weekly Standard, tweeted this out just recently. "Here's my deep analysis of the race based on careful study of county and precinct level results. OMG, oh my God." Eric Erickson, who is from Red State, another conservative writer, wrote, "Republicans can't win anymore by relying on just white people. Will be uttered again in 4 years as it was this year." So again, we haven't seen as much jubilation as we might expect from Republicans yet, but still a growing sense of confidence that this is clearly going their way.
That's right, William. And the race is not over yet, but they're showing some confidence now and beginning to say this race is going in Donald Trump's direction. The silent majority of Trump supporters are coming through.
One other tweet that we just saw recently, this was put out by Jodi Kantor. She is a reporter for the New York Times. She wrote a biography of the Obamas. And she wrote, "What I'm hearing from Democratic women again and again, what am I going to tell my daughters in the morning?" Certainly this was something that Hillary Clinton had hoped would be a big rallying cry for her voters, that the idea of possibly seeing a woman in the White House, clearly this one reporter is hearing from a lot of them that they're feeling deeply despondent, to say the least.
That's right, William. There is going to be a lot of despair on the Democratic side if Hillary Clinton does indeed lose. We're starting to see that on social media. We're following this, all these reactions coming in a very different night for Hillary Clinton supporters than they expected.
One other thing that we've been picking up on is a few environmentalists who are looking at the possibility of a Trump presidency. Again, we're still waiting on final results on this, but Bill McKibben, who has been one of the leading environmental activists pushing for stricter and tougher rules on climate change and greater action, tweeted out just recently, "If Trump wins, it savages the planet's chances of dealing with climate change in the very long run, the biggest result of a hideous night." Anyway, we'll keep watching on Twitter. We'll keep watching on social media. Daniel Bush and I will be back later on. Thanks very much. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, William and Daniel. All that really fascinating, the social media reaction. We're here watching the wires and other sources of information. We're talking about it around the table. Canada's immigration website has apparently crashed online, suggesting that a number of Americans are looking at moving to Canada. We don't know much beyond that at this point. We've reported earlier the financial markets have reacted, the futures markets, by plunging, at least at this point. We don't know what's going to happen. The election has not been called yet. You can see there at this point it's 244 electoral votes for Donald Trump and 209 for Hillary Clinton. You need 270 to become president. But Amy Walter, as we were saying a minute ago, the path for Hillary Clinton has narrowed considerably.
I mean, we're getting also to a place where Hillary Clinton could end up winning the popular vote and losing the electoral vote, which obviously the winner of the electoral vote is the winner of the presidency. But it would be sort of cold comfort to Democrats that they would have won the popular vote.
You're watching KRCB, made possible by viewers like you.
The first place I lived at when I moved here was on
strongly
Benton
think
Avenue.
that the
So I lived around Roseland.
Hi, we're the Cloverdale
for
High
most of
School
my life.
My
thing is,
I
want to learn.
I'm Kirsten Stewart.
And
I keep wanting to learn.
We're juniors.
I don't get tired of learning.
Hola, mi nombre es Pablo Velasco.
Hola, mi nombre es Alex Torres y somos estudiantes de la preparatoria de Roseland en el 11 grado.
Hola, soy Julia Carranza y trabajo para el distrito de Roseland. Mi nombre es Julia Carranza, vivo aquí en Santa Rosa por más de 22 años y trabajo en el distrito como el 4 de mayo cumplo 11 años aquí. Si no tienen el estómago lleno, la mente va a estar vacía porque van a estar pensando que tienen hambre. Entonces es muy importante que siempre tengan un alimento en su cuerpo y más que es orgánica. ¿Qué no me gusta de la comunidad de Roseland? Pues difícil de decir, pero lo que me gustaría más es que los papás tuviéramos más tiempo para asistir a actividades o estar más en la escuela con ustedes. Es lo que me gustaría más en la comunidad. Un área segura, un centro comunitario donde los niños puedan tener actividades, donde se puedan desarrollar personalmente mejor, tener mejor opciones. Me gustaría ver un lugar donde los niños tengan oportunidades de aprender cosas de manualidades, deportes, cine, arte, baile, tantas cosas que podríamos ofrecer y a veces porque no hay dónde, como ahorita que estamos aquí, buscando un espacio, es lo que me gustaría ver, un lugar seguro para ellos. ¿Qué había sido este año verla?
Explore Japan's unique car culture on Samurai Wheels. Test the latest models, follow environmental trends, and take a peek into the lifestyles of car lovers. Japan Railway Journal investigates the country's legendary rail system. Find out what makes Japanese trains fast, safe, and efficient. Samurai Wheels and Japan Railway Journal, Thursdays on NHK World TV.
KRCB North Bay Public Media presents live 2016 elections special coverage. Here with the election returns and the latest local, regional, and statewide news is Bruce Robinson, KRCB News Director and host of the North Bay Report on Radio 91, KRCB FM.
Live from the KRCB studios, this is a special edition of the North Bay Report.
I'm News Director Bruce Robinson, along with KRCB's senior election analyst Dick Spotswood. The polls have closed and the first local results have begun to come in. We'll bring you up to date on those in just a moment. We do invite you to stay with us through the next 2 hours as we bring you complete local coverage of the races and results here in the North Bay. Scheduled to join us along the way, we have candidates, campaign officials, and some other interested observers. But first, please welcome my associate here in the studio, Dick Spotswood. Dick, all the acrimony at the top of the ticket didn't so much filter down into California, or did it?
No, it didn't, but it did suck the air out of almost every other campaign. The classic example is the race for the United States Senate between Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez. Mostly
big office, little drama.
Well, very few people knew the race was going on. Two Democrats running against each other, slight variations and differences, but nobody talked about it. Everybody concentrated on the presidential race, which has now stunned America as the results come in tonight. And once again, the wind is sucked out of the room by this incredible first time we've ever had a presidential race like this.
In the Senate race, as you mentioned, this is a Democrat-on-Democrat race, a function of our top two primary system.
Right.
And here in the North Bay, we've got a few of those as well.
We do. The California State Assembly race in the 10th District between Veronica Jacoby, a former Santa Rosa council member, and the incumbent Democrat Mark Levine. Two Democrats. The Republican Todd Hooper came in third. Mm-hmm. This is a very blue part of America. That map out there shows us off on the distant coast, the dark,
the left
dark
coast.
blue. Well, that's right. And the numbers show it tonight, where Hillary Clinton is approaching 80% in Marin County and approaching 75% in Sonoma County.
So here we are, trying to bring the focus in on the local scene. What are you most interested in watching play out tonight?
Well, I'm always interested in supervisorial races. Each county has this time a classic race in kind of the same district. The coastal
They're adjacent.
Yeah, we have. It's just amazing that the two counties have a similar district. In Marin County's 4th district, two good guys. I know them both from West Marin. Dennis Rodoni and Dominic Grossi are running a real close race. They had a huge field in the primary, and right now at the early returns with about 29% in, Dennis Rodoni is ahead with 52.83%. Grossi in second place at 47.6%. It's still too close to call.
Maybe not so much in the contested Sonoma County 5th District Supervisor race.
Well,
although, again, not so many ballots to refer to this
very low turnout so far. The actual raw numbers in Sonoma County has Linda Hopkins ahead 57% to Noreen Evans' 42.3%. But the raw numbers are so low, I would find that interesting if I was Hopkins. But yeah.
So do you see parallels between those two races in terms of the way that the electorate is divided and the way the issues have played out at all, or is there any similarity?
No, I don't think there is, because the Sonoma County race really has ag interest versus perhaps labor on one side and more central Sonoma issues. The Marin County issue, I gave a talk to Rotary Club last week, and I explained the race as follows. Rodoni was against oysters, and Grossi was for oysters. I said, everybody know what that means? Yeah.
That's in an oyster shell.
Yeah, the oyster wars. And they're both for cows. Everybody nodded. So those shorthand terms kind of define the race, where the real heart of the Agriculture Committee is for Dominic Grossi. Environmental people have gone pretty heavily for Dennis Rodoni. They're both environmentalists. They're both pro-ag.
So we're going to look at some slides now, and some of these results that we were talking about. That 50% reporting number is not verifiable, but it does give you an indication, as Dick was just saying, of how the initial split looks in that hotly contested race in the western part of Sonoma County.
Big spending in that race, too.
A lot of the big spending, and a lot of the debate was about that spending.
That's right.
Who was doing it and why.
That's the Rodoni-Grossi race I just mentioned, West Marin, but actually the majority of the population is in East Marin, in Cornabara, West Novato, and parts of San Rafael.
Moving over to Napa County, there's a contested supervisorial race over there. Incumbent Mark Luce looks like he's well on his way to, I believe, a 4th term.
Yeah, he's been around for a while.
So incumbency seems to be a strong suit where it prevails, where it applies. Looking across some of the races here in Santa Rosa, all of our cities, save Rohnert Park, have contested elections in this balloting. And as you see here, looks like a pretty clear split for the top 3 seats. And then Jack Tibbetts, not alphabetical order there, but he is actually the leading vote getter, followed by Julie Combs and Ernesto Oliveras, the 2 incumbents. Chris Rogers and Jack Tibbetts, the 2 sort of young Turks in that race, look like they are kind of settling out already as we look at the numbers there. We are also going to look briefly at the ballot measures here in Sonoma County. The one that all Sonoma County residents are voting on was Measure Y, a sales tax to boost library funds and get some extra hours open again. There's a lot of support for that in the early going, and that's a good thing because that one is like a lot of ballot measures and requiring a two-thirds supermajority
It's in good shape.
in order to pass.
In very good shape.
Elsewhere, we are looking at a couple of other measures that apply just in the unincorporated areas. The regional parks funding pushing that 67% that it needs for passage. That's not quite there. Community separators, very little controversy about that. Everybody seems to be in support
It really,
of that.
with 82%, it really is a strong indication of where the folks in Sonoma County feel about that towns shouldn't be like the San Francisco Peninsula. They run together.
The green spaces have a lot of friends
Absolutely.
around here. And that seems to be carrying over to the support for Measure M, which would ban the prospect of GMO crops being here in Sonoma County. If there are any actively happening now, they are very small. And that, like Measure K, requires just a simple majority to pass. So we'll get on to some of the other measures here in a moment. There's the one here for you in your county.
Yeah, but it's two-thirds. This is for after-school education and health care, really after-school care for kids. It requires a two-thirds majority to pass. 61% is not a good sign for Measure A at this point.
Looks like it's got a bit of a struggle. And finally, a couple of the most salient statewide ballot propositions. The return of bilingual education in public schools appears to be off to a very strong start, and much closer than some people expected, perhaps, on Measure 64, which would legalize recreational use of marijuana and commercial use of hemp here
Big deal
in
for the North Bay and the North Coast.
And one that has deeply divided a lot of people, both within the industry and without. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as it falls, as we proceed this evening. But right now, we'd like to welcome our first visitor to the set, Jared Huffman, Congressman from San Rafael, and an incumbent. Looks like you're heading back east again.
It looks like it.
In a landslide.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. It's hard to feel conflicted sitting here on big numbers in my own race, but I'm looking at the national race, and frankly, it feels like I've been punched in the gut.
Your job just got harder.
Unless things have changed in the last 3 minutes, it looks like Donald Trump is in good shape.
It does. It looks like a Republican Senate. It looks like Democrats will eke out only a few House seats. And we are in for a very, very difficult next few years.
Does Paul Ryan survive?
I don't think so. I think you've got a very vindictive new leader in Donald Trump, if indeed he is the leader. We still have Michigan to watch very closely late tonight, but it's hard to imagine Donald Trump bearing the hatchet there.
No.
Bearing the hatchet doesn't seem to be something he does.
Yeah.
Jared, my first reaction to the kind of shocking news tonight is that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party will never be the same. Reaction?
I'm not sure the country will ever be
well,
the
that's
same.
Well, that's a different topic. Yeah.
Honestly, this election opened up divisions and fissures within our country that I really didn't think still existed. So there's a lot of reckoning to be done, and I don't think any of us are really sure where this goes.
When you go back to work, where do you begin? What do you do first?
It depends entirely on who's in the White House. I frankly hadn't given a lot of thought to a Trump administration. I saw it as such an incredible long shot. But God forbid if he pulls us out, it's defense in a big, big way for the next several years to try to limit the damage, try to hold him accountable. And you know, I will hope that he has an epiphany and that he somehow becomes a level-headed problem solver and steers the country in positive ways. But all indications are that's not what we're going to get.
The economic problems that America will face probably within the next 12 hours are severe. The market is apparently, world markets are tumbling down.
Yeah.
I hate to use the word crash because we'll have to see what that means, but that's a problem. There'll be a great loss of wealth, actually, for the United States. How do we cope with that?
You're going to have a Black Wednesday if people wake up in the morning and Donald Trump has 270.
The overnight markets are already acting.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very concerned. Frankly, it's not just the markets. It's going to be our allies around the world. It's going to be the foreign policy establishment. It's going to be, you know, the entire country. Nobody really imagined that we would have a President Donald Trump.
When you refer to the prospect of playing defense in a more aggressive mode, Are we likely to see the Democratic minority be as aggressive in digging in its heels and offering resistance as the Republicans have been in the Obama administration?
Well, no, we're not going to manufacture controversy. That's what the Republicans have done in the Obama administration. And it's all been political theater. It's all been for their base, and it's not been about issues that really matter in people's lives. The Democrats are going to go to the mat for issues that matter in people's lives. We have to. There's too much at stake. Now, how we do that, I think, will have a very different character than what you've seen from the obstructionist Republican majority.
Jared, the Democrats have always seen themselves as the party of the working man.
Yeah.
Tonight it's pretty clear the party of the working man is not necessarily the Republican Party, it's the Trump Party. What can the Democrats do to go back and regain, it's identity politics. What can they do to go back and get the white working man? Not the working man, the white working man.
Well, one thing I think we're going to all have to do is take some time to really process and understand what has just happened. Where did these numbers prove to be so different from what all of the models and all of the pundits were expecting? It looks like rural America turned out at about a 10% bump from what was expected, and that may well be the difference. And I have long believed that Democrats need to offer more of a vision and more of a portfolio of solutions to rural America. I have rural districts, rural counties that I represent, and I would love to see Democrats being the party of broadband internet to every underserved rural area in America. That's one example of the kind of infrastructure economic development solution we could offer to rural America. We just don't seem that interested. We're very urban focused as Democrats.
Well, also though, the Democratic view is generally that there's an economic solution to it. We'll have a program for it, broadband internet, or we'll have better Medicare or something. My sense is that these voters in these rural but blue collar areas, whether they're rural or Youngstown, Ohio, feel that they've been either lost in the process of urbanization, diversity, modernization, or disrespected.
Well, there's probably some of that for sure, Dick, but I think it's globalization. I think it's the fast pace of social change in this country. I think it's many things. There obviously there are greater concentrations of evangelicals in many of those rural communities. So there's a real divide, and we're going to have to reckon with it.
I saw that Utah, by the way, which was supposed to be in play, or close, was pretty clearly for Trump. It seemed almost a rejection of the Mormon leadership.
It was way different than what all the polls were suggesting. So there was definitely a coming home to Trump effect that happened in the final days of this election that nobody saw coming. And you could say going into this election, if you sort of rewind a little bit, we've just been through 8 years of a Democratic president. On the natural, it's going to be a change election, especially with the wrong track numbers being very high in all the polls. But I think with the advent of Trump as the nominee, everyone thought that it might not be such a change election. In the end, it turned out to be one. Mm-hmm. And look, Trump is the candidate of change. It's very scary, unpredictable, potentially reckless change, but it's change.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing how it all plays out, of course, for better or for worse. Thank you for being with us this evening, and good luck going forward.
Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming by KRCB as always, Jared.
Thank you both.
Good.
So we're going to take a quick look at some of the other slides that we have for you on races here in California at the statewide level. And to no one's surprise, Kamala Harris, the commanding lead in that Democrat-on-Democrat race that we mentioned earlier, Dick.
Loretta Sanchez really thought that this was going to be a contested race. I mean, I think the presidential race really did hurt her because there was very little attention paid to the Senate race. And Harris jumped out early. Her timing was perfect. Sanchez is a Southern California. Harris, she's moved to Los Angeles, by the way, but she's perceived as a Northern California person. And it's just a landslide for Harris. This is a solidly Democratic state. You didn't even have a Republican couldn't make the top two.
Right, so no surprise there. Other than perhaps the fact that it's as lopsided as it appears to be.
Yeah, that's a surprise. I would have, if I had to predict, I would have thought it'd been more like a 55-45.
Another of the Democrat on Democrat races that we referenced earlier, Bill Dodd and Marika Yamada for the 3rd State Senate District. And so far, the former Napa County supervisor looks like he's on top in that one.
Yeah, this is a very good example of how to follow these races. There's 31% reporting with a big lead of 65 to 35 with 31%. Irregardless of where the vote is coming from, Dodd is in very, very good shape. He's a former Republican. Like many Democrats, as things change, or many Republicans, has changed in the last 20 years. Congressman Mark DeSaulnier of the East Bay, as an example, they changed their registration and became Democrats.
As you see, the one that's more conventionally contested in the 4th District, Cecilia Aguilar-Curry, the Democratic candidate, somewhat predictably in a largely Democratic district, again, out to a strong lead in that particular district.
Yeah, that's a pretty Democratic district, so it's not a giant shock that she would be ahead of the game.
She's not particularly well known to voters on this end of the district, but
she's from Winters, I believe, isn't she?
I think so.
She's the mayor of Winters.
But again, that D, I think, carries a lot of weight, even if you don't know the personality so much.
Yeah, and it's done by the redistricting committee, but it's a very sprawling, not necessarily connected. I'm not sure the rationale for putting that district together.
It's probably a leftover district when they put the others around it. Jim Wood, our representative from up in Healdsburg, one of the few healthcare professionals in the legislature, commanding early lead in his race, so it looks like he will be going back to Sacramento for a second term, and good luck to him.
Is Anton a Republican?
Yes.
Okay.
Anton's a Republican. And then finally in the local races that we're looking at, Mark Levine, if that's correct, surprisingly trailing in his system, I think we might have our numbers inverted on this one.
Let me indicate that that's not correct.
So we want to see here that, for the most part, incumbents in the North Bay and in California are going back. When there's not an incumbent, we see a Democratic candidate prevailing. When there's 2 Democrats, more often it seems to be the more centrist, more business-oriented Democrat.
Well, that's the Dodd situation, and the Dodd
Levine
versus
as well.
situation completely. Let's just give you an example of why that number is wrong. Here are the Marin County numbers. Mark Levine has 76.5% of the Marin County vote. Veronica Jacoby has 23.4% of the Marin County vote. 2/3 of the district, 60% of the district is Marin County. That's simply an error.
Let's look at some of the other city council races here in Sonoma County. As we mentioned earlier, just about all of the cities are in play. In Cloverdale, had the biggest field for just 2 seats, and you see all 8 names there in that race. 2 of them were incumbents, Marianne Brigham and Robert Cox. Brigham seems to be in a very strong position, probably quite a cluster there for that second place position. As you can see, there's only 2 percentage points separating the next 5 candidates.
No, Bagby's in second place.
So that would be...
And Lucchini is in
yeah, they're tied, and 2 at 13 and 1 at 12. So with relatively small amount of the electorate in so far, we can expect that to check out a little bit more as we go forward. Closer to us here in Cotati, again, the incumbents are well in command there, it would appear. I don't think there's been a particular call for discontent in the city. I think there's a general sentiment that the town of Cotati is doing pretty well, and so John Deloso, Susan Harvey, and Wendy Skillman each look to be well on the way to another term. Eris Weaver, the only challenger who looks close to possibly getting a seat as the numbers come in.
Bruce, just to correct that, I've just checked the Sonoma County results, and Levine is winning with 66.6% to Jacoby's 33.4%, just to verify that those numbers were inaccurate. We now have both Marin and Sonoma numbers. Levine is getting about 65, 70% of the vote.
And that actually is not too far afield from what the primary results showed.
Not unexpected.
Up in Healdsburg, we have 3 seats available, and a pair of incumbent councilmen looks like they're well poised to hold on to their seats. Newcomer David Hagley is the 3rd strongest running candidate. Actually, he's in 2nd place, as you can see. But it's a pretty well divided field, and it was generally a strong field of candidates. Citizens of Healdsburg had some difficult choices to make amongst a good field.
Well, the town's changing a lot, with tourism and really becoming an upscale community. I think a lot of folks have felt a little dislocated on that.
It's interesting to note, too, we'll touch on it later in more detail, but Healdsburg is one of several towns in Sonoma County that had some pretty significant ballot measures that they were talking about, one of them having to do with the city's growth management ordinance and how that would be played forward how it would be played out going forward. There's some people want to make some big changes in it. Other folks, including most of the incumbents, thinking it's better to leave it in place rather than try to do wholesale changes. Interesting case in the town of Sebastopol. There are 4 candidates, one including a write-in candidate. It's a rare thing for a successful write-in candidate, but as former mayor of the town, Craig Litwin seems to be in a fighting position to see that, and we'll know more when we actually have some numbers. Over in Sonoma, again, 4 candidates and 2 seats. We have 2 incumbents, but it appears that newcomer Amy Harrington will claim one of those seats. Yeah. And if the numbers hold up, it'll be David Cook who stays on. Lori Gallion will just make the cut, as it shows so far. And finally, up in Windsor, again, 2 seats available, a 5-member field there. The 2 incumbents, once again, leading pretty strongly in the absence of any severe dissatisfaction with the way the town is going. Michael Wall in a relatively strong 3rd position, but it appears that the incumbents there are off to a very strong start.
5-time mayor.
5-time mayor.
Ran for supervisor and other offices.
2-time candidate for supervisor and longtime member of the SMART board.
Yes.
Very strong advocate for that. So those are the city council races. We've talked to Jared Huffman. We've been seeing about what the numbers are looking like for the Senate. Not a lot of change expected there. What's governance going to look like in the future of this country? What's your best guess at this point? How can we speculate when there's so little track record to base that on?
The bad news is that we are so divided in this country that, in my opinion, it was reminiscent of the mid-1850s. When the country at least was geographically divided. We're not geographically divided, we're demographically divided. The real negative that we have right now is a distrust of institutions and a rise of a social media lifestyle, I don't know if the lifestyle, but social media element that means that you get to pick your own facts. And if we can't agree on facts, democracy doesn't really
basis for any other agreement
work. And I think this is a very good example. And some people are going to regard this as an extreme statement, but this is a very good example of reminiscing, if it was, I think, Benjamin Franklin's statement.
That's going way back.
Gotten, Doctor? The answer is a republic if you can keep it. The founders knew that it wasn't inevitable. We had to work to keep it. We've forgotten that. We can't work together, we can't compromise, and there's a yearning in that situation for an authoritarian situation. Not healthy. But that's the reality that an awful lot of people feel. Somebody's got to take control of this country and return it to what we used to be. When that was, I'm not sure. But that's what it is.
So we've come out of 8 years in which the White House has been a pretty strong player. It's been a center of power on Capitol Hill, albeit in kind of a difficult equilibrium. Given the change of administration that we're probably looking at, does the Senate assume more of a greater role in setting the agenda, in shaping the direction of policy?
No, because Mitch McConnell will be the majority leader. Politicians are survivalist. The Republican Party going forward will be the Donald Trump Party, not the Rotary Republicans, not the middle-class people, what do they call them? Country club Republicans, people that live in.
But who are the Trump Republicans in Congress?
Well, they're
in the Senate in particular.
You look at Newt Gingrich. He was for small government, for trade, for all this stuff, and he saw the winds change and he swifted. They will shift. They will follow the Trump lead because it's a winning lead. Politicians are such that you follow a winner. I get that. I mean, that doesn't. It's not a shock. It's the nature of human nature. Politics is simply, there's 2 things in life. There's politics and religion. And one's man's relationship with man, the other's man's relationship with God. That's life. And politics teaches us that people want to win and be in power, and they do what's necessary. Trump's apparent victory is a message that this is a winning route. They will follow that route.
So this is Al Davis in politics. Just win, baby.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to shock anybody, but absolutely. Has it always been that way? Cynics will say yes. Historians will say no, that's absurd. But it appears to be the way, at least in the short term, going forward. I think David Brooks wrote a column in this morning's Times. Brooks, is a moderate Republican, and he says, I always poo-pooed the idea of a third party. And I'm convinced now that we need a third party.
What does this mean for California?
Nothing. As far as the state's daily concerns, will probably be more. Nothing.
Nothing significant.
No, that's too curt. California's lifestyle is not going to change because of this. We are an economic engine of America. We are the success of America. You know, it's been downplayed as the country in ruins. Try walking through San Francisco and Los Angeles and tell yourself that's true. No, California, if anything, California will become more focused upon itself. And states' rights, almost, they would never use that term.
Okay. Well, let's bring our focus back here to Sonoma County for a little bit and welcome our next guest to the set. Noreen Evans, welcome to KRCB, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Happy to be here.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
An unusual night.
It is.
You've
it's
had
be a long one.
A rigorous few months. How are you holding up?
Great.
Well, you're a veteran campaigner.
Yes,
You've
I've
been
been
on the Santa
through
Rosa
this
Council, Assembly.
Yes.
State Senate?
Senate.
So
right.
this is not exactly a revelation to you.
No, it's not new. I've been here before.
What's the
I've
biggest?
been here before.
Yes.
But in this race, what's your biggest surprise?
You know, we don't have any numbers yet. So
But-
we have tiny.
No, but I mean, if
preliminary
you
numbers.
campaign, what's your biggest surprise?
Oh, in the
with folks?
campaign? You know, I wouldn't say there were too many surprises with the constituents. I think the big money that came in a very negative way against me, that was a bit of a surprise. Although I knew it was going to happen, I didn't know it would be quite so negative and quite so much. So that was
What are we
kind of
talking
new.
about? Many of the viewers won't know the numbers. So could you just refresh our memories?
It was about $180,000 that was spent against me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the total campaign, it must have been $500,000 for the whole thing, for both
Oh,
candidates?
no, it's more like $750,000.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And that's unusual
Yeah.
for Sonoma County, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty high. Yeah. Yeah.
And this for a sprawling rural district where
Right.
agriculture is probably the dominant industry.
Yes, I would say so.
And agriculture seemed to be split pretty centrally on this one. How do you try to find commonality in that?
Well, I think this 5th district is the most diverse district, I think, in the county. Remember, it goes from the urban part of Santa Rosa through Sebastopol, all of the river communities, and then all of the lower Russian River communities, and then all of the coastal communities. So it's very diverse. Finding commonality wasn't that difficult, though, because the overriding issue, I think, for the county as a whole, not just the 5th district, is housing. Housing that's affordable to working families, housing that the next generation could afford to live in, and that really unifies everybody, I think.
How much difference was there between you and your point on that particular point, though?
Well, I mean, everybody says they want affordable housing
Right.
and they want workforce housing. I think the difference is how we would approach providing that housing. Of course, I have many years of experience in working on affordable housing issues, and so I've heard a lot of the arguments from the development community, such as reduce our fees and we'll, magically build more affordable housing. So I know that that's not the answer. And in my proposals, I had a whole number of proposals, but one of the big ones is the inclusionary requirement that every new development would have to include a component of workforce or affordable housing. And that's something that communities have not been able to do for the last few years because there have been lawsuits filed against them. But recently the Supreme Court has said we can go ahead and do that.
There's almost a misimpression that your district is so heavily agriculture, you don't have to talk about urban issues. But even folks in Gurneville have urban issues.
Oh, sure.
Let me just talk about agriculture for a second, though. The wine industry has been a player in this race and has pretty much backed your opponent.
Right.
What's the cause of that?
What's the cause of that?
What's the difference for the viewers that aren't following people
Well,
outside the district?
I think that's a question to ask of the wine industry.
Okay.
Why they decided to do that,
Did it come as a surprise?
A bit. I chaired the wine committee in the state legislature for 10 years, and I've worked on issues related to wineries in California for a long time. I would say that the issues statewide are a lot different than the issues locally. Locally, you tend to look at issues relating to regulation of pesticides, of water use, and actually one of the things, going back to your earlier question about what was critical in this election, water is one of the issues that didn't get talked about a whole lot, but I think underlies a whole lot of the way that this election broke down. And the wine industry is always interested in using more water.
And groundwater in particular, because that's starting to come into regulation in a way it never has been before.
Exactly.
Look forward, presuming you're elected to the Board of Supervisors, and also presuming that the legalization of marijuana occurs.
Right.
How's that going to impact Sonoma County?
Huge. It's huge. I think it's really underestimated at this point what the long-term impacts of the cannabis industry are going to be in Sonoma County. We're talking about impacts on water specifically, impacts on the wine industry, because that is really going to take over a whole lot of land, I think. And our economy. I mean, there's some real good things that can come with this because there will be new tax revenues, but at the same time, there are some real impacts on our communities, particularly given the fact that some of the growing may take place in rural residential neighborhoods that will be impacted.
So are we actually looking to say where pot's going to pave the potholes?
Well, obviously that's a source of new revenues, and that's one of the things that I've always said we should do is use some of those new revenues to rebuild our roads.
Has anybody decided yet what the revenues are going to go for, or is that still up in play?
No, you know, you have to look at Colorado and Washington and Oregon to see what they've brought in, but California is so much bigger. It's really hard to get any handle on numbers. It's really just a guess. It's in the multi-millions of dollars
And even what
every year.
the numbers are going to be is pretty speculative.
Right. It's all speculative at this point. We can look at those other states, though, and we know that it's going to be significant.
More significant in Sonoma County than our neighboring counties?
Well, if you look at Mendocino and Humboldt and Lake, probably not. It would probably be somewhat similar. But as far as other counties in the state of California, yeah, I think quite significant.
There's a lot of resistance to the notion that Santa Rosa, Sonoma County could become a hub of this emerging new industry. Is that just a holdover from some past attitudes, or is there some serious downside to be weighed here?
Well, I think there are some serious pros and some serious cons, and there are some potential downsides. I'm not sure this is how Sonoma County would envision itself if we wanted to sit down and describe what kind of community we want to be. But the fact is, if Proposition 64 passes tonight, and it looks like it is.
It was leading last time we looked.
Right, then we are going to have to deal with that. It's going to become our reality. You know, we're going to have to deal with the impacts. And there's going to be some good ones too, though. You know, not having this substance be illegal is going to be significant for us.
Bruce asked me just before you came on, what's the impact, my opinion of the impact of a potential Donald Trump administration on California. I'm going to ask you, turn around and ask you that question. What do you think the impact of a potential Donald Trump administration would be on Sonoma County?
I'm really trying not to think about that. Seriously. I mean, I hesitate to even think about it. But I will say this, that Sonoma County is, you know, sometimes we say we live in a bubble because people here are far more progressive, and we are taking care of the environment. We want cultural diversity, things that are very antithetical to what Donald Trump stands for. So I think Sonoma County, under a potential Trump administration, will be a bastion of hope and optimism for the rest of the country.
Might California actually start to think of itself and really start to take care of its own problems and try to direct itself a little more away from the national administration?
You know, I think that we have done that for a very long time. California is the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world. So we kind of have driven our own direction for quite a long time. But you're probably right. I think we will do that more and more.
I guess we'll see how it all plays out as the weeks and months unfold. We want to thank you for being with us here tonight.
My pleasure.
Good luck to you as the nights go on.
Thank you. It's going to be a long night.
Well, Sonoma County does take
it always is in Sonoma County.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Noreen, thank you very much for being with us. Noreen Evans seeking the 5th supervisorial district seat here in Sonoma County. Let us look now to some of the other ballot measures that voters are deciding across Sonoma County.
This is Napa.
Napa has 3 measures which address 2 subjects. It's an interesting mix of things. Measure Z, a fairly straightforward bid to continue the sales tax for their parks and open space district. But measures A and B address the same subject in virtually the same language. But measure A is the one that the Board of Supervisors crafted to give themselves a little bit of financial protection. Measure B would have opened them to potential exposure. And so I assume that the one with the greater number of votes will prevail. And in this case, it looks like the board is having the greater number, but some animal rights people may be hedging their bets just in case.
I think there's like a 4-word difference between the two, and basically says
all available resources,
whatever that means,
as opposed to cost-effective measures in Measure A.
Right.
So that's a big difference.
Over the Measure T.
Measure T in Healdsburg, we're back now to, it would ban fluoridation of their water. They've been doing it up there for a long time. It's been on the ballot before. It was defeated a couple of years ago, and general popular attitudes about fluoridation in Healdsburg do not appear to have changed.
No.
It
The wording's a little differently, but 2 years, 2 times in 2 years is the message.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt that your assemblyman from Healdsburg is a dentist and has weighed in on that side of the measure. Measure R was seeking to make changes in the growth management ordinance in the city of Healdsburg. Majority of the population, based on these early numbers, don't think that it needs changing.
Right.
So those are the measures there. Moving up 101 a little further north in Cloverdale, the city would be the first in California to impose a tax on sales of cannabis. At this point, just medical, but presumably more going forward if Proposition 64 prevails. That would be over and above whatever taxation happens as a result of Proposition 64 at the state level. And it looks like folks in Cloverdale see some easy money.
Well, 64 is probably going to pass, and nobody knows what's going to happen when it passes, but everybody involved, they talk about the green rush. If this passes as a green rush, everybody believes they're going to make lots of money.
Yeah, except if
they
people
may
are
not
growing
all.
now.
Yeah.
A lot of those folks are worried about it, and it's got a lot of opposition from the current growers.
That's right, because I read the other day that the market could drop 90%. The cost of street cost of marijuana.
Yeah, so we'll actually a little bit later we'll be talking with somebody in the industry and get some data into that. Over in Katahdin, a very little contested measure to sustain their urban growth boundary. That one appears to be moving ahead with great success. And back at the state level, the call to repeal the death penalty is trailing at this point by a 10-point margin, as we can see. Whereas the bid to make the appeals process a little smoother and expedite it, that one appears to have...
The pundits knew nothing this year, because pundits thought that the last time it was closer, I believe, when they tried to get rid of the death penalty. And a 45-55, no 55, is a pretty resounding vote to keep the death penalty. Nobody, by the way, has actually been executed in the state of California for many years.
Yes.
So it's more of a theoretical operation than practical, but people emotionally vote on this issue, and a 45-55 is probably going to stun the death penalty abolition advocates.
Yes, yes, but the bid to make the appeals process a little more streamlined, that seems to have been striking a common sense chord with a lot of people.
30% of the people that were, according to polling, that voted yes on 65 also voted yes on 67.
Mm-hmm. Plastic bags, again, another measure in the state that had two different measures about it, and very confusing to a lot of folks. The measure 65 that wanted to reallocate funds for the sales of those bags was seen as the smokescreen being put up by the plastic bag industry.
That's right.
Voters and a lot of advocates were not deceived by that, and so Proposition 67 would in fact uphold the legislative action to ban the plastic bags. And I've always thought this was, Dick, was kind of those interests that kind of was a counterpoint to the question of, well, why is all this stuff on the ballot if the legislature doesn't act? Well, the legislature did act. It's on the ballot anyway.
But it's signatures. It's what we call direct democracy, and it takes signatures. It's usually financial entities are involved. In this case, this is funded by the plastic bag industry. It makes some sense.
Okay, so we're going to review the numbers we have on a couple of the other races here in Sonoma County, the ones that are kind of the top of our list this evening. As we've been telling you, the early numbers for the supervisor race in Sonoma County, the one that was not decided in June, Noreen Evans, who is just with us, is currently trailing newcomer Linda Hopkins with a very small amount of the vote here at this point.
Let me
and
point
your
out,
friends down in Marin are still kind of clustered there too.
Yeah, it's coming. They got 26% of the vote reporting in Marin County, with Dennis Rodoni, who's a contractor in Old Lima, and Dominic Rossi, who is a dairy rancher in West Novato. A very close race. Two West County guys in a district in which like 55-60% are East County.
How much difference do you see between these guys?
I wrote a column which made a lot of people angry that said there wasn't a heck of a lot of difference. They're two very good guys. They're basically moderates. They're both pro-agriculture. They're both environmentalists. The biggest issue was Dennis Rodoni opposed retention of the oyster farm. which was a very emotional issue, and Grassi supported it. The next big issue to come up is trying to restrict the use of dairy in Point Reyes Station. There is no constituency to get rid of the cows politically, and both are in favor of the cows. So we tell people once they split on the oysters, they're both for the cows, and it tells you what you need to know.
Over in Napa County, also one district there with a supervisor race being contested. And if these numbers are correct, it's a flip from what we saw earlier. 94% reporting, and it looks like Ryan Gregory is, according to these numbers, positioned to pull something of an upset.
Mark Lewis has been there forever, hasn't he?
And it looks like he may be looking for something else to do.
Yeah.
And finally, we have a couple of the other ballot measures we want to touch base on. We'll get to those in a moment after we take another look here at the Santa Rosa City Council, which has, unchanged from before, the top vote getters being Jack Tibbetts, Julie Combs, Ernesto Oliveras, and Chris Rogers in that order. So 2 incumbents and 2 very appealing young candidates who could change the character of that board just a little bit. And finally, here in Sonoma County, as mentioned, the ballot measure for funding for Sonoma County's libraries. Lots of people love their libraries, and this one, having failed a couple of years ago, came back. Even despite the crowded ballot, they're well on the way to get that 2/3 majority they need to secure that additional funding. Additional funding for parks, a little bit touchier question, it seems, but community separators are very popular.
That requires 2/3 vote, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And community separators, as I say, and GMO crops, yes for the separators, no for the crops, both measures passing.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question on GMOs. It only applies to unincorporated areas.
That would be right, because I don't think anybody's growing many crops in the incorporated
Well,
areas.
if you had one, it'd be interesting.
I don't know if maybe that's home gardens. I don't know how they
I don't know.
deal with those. And finally, the one down in your neighborhood.
Not getting 2/3. This is for preschool education. It would be basically for low-income folks. It would be a small increase, a 1/4 inch increase in the sales tax. It needs 2/3 to pass. Right now, with only 12% of the votes reporting, it's falling short with 61%.
Lots of support for the resumption of bilingual education in California. And as you can see, that one is sailing ahead by a 3-to-1 margin. So that's a pretty effective victory there. Proposition 64, however, a little bit closer with, however, still a good-sized majority supporting it at this stage in the reporting.
Yeah, that's 20%. I just would have a hunch at 56-44. These statewide races, when they have that kind of number, they tend to stick. The numbers move 2, 3, 4%, but I think the passage of 64 looks pretty solid.
Again, I'm assuming that these are statewide numbers and not just Sonoma County, though, and that would make a difference, I think. As we've noted before, Kamala Harris way out in front in her Senate race, virtual shoe-in, I think, for a new job in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
Likewise, Bill Dodd, commanding lead in his bid to move up to the state Senate.
You mentioned before the moderate versus maybe progressive. Dodd is more of a moderate, and Yamada, who is a former member of the state assembly, was termed out, is certainly to the left of Dodd.
So again, the centrist majority seems to cue that way, and particularly I think in these races where you have 2 Democrats, whatever support they will pull from the other side of the aisle would tend to gravitate toward the more moderate member of that race.
That's right.
We've talked about this before. Cecilia Aguilar Curry, newcomer to state politics, again with about a 60-40 split on that race, and she will most likely take on a new job in Sacramento. Jim Wood, the dentist from Healdsburg we mentioned a moment ago, well liked in his district, and he's been a pretty active player on a number of issues that are of concern to folks here at home, so it's no surprise that he too is well on his way to a return term.
Once again, in the 10th Assembly District, this is 2/3 Marin County, 1/3 Sonoma County. The incumbent is a moderate Democrat, Mark Levine. Veronica Jacoby is a progressive Democrat. A former 1-term member of the Santa Rosa Council was defeated, and she beat the Republican, Todd Hooper, to come in second. So it's Democrat versus Democrat, and Levine with 31% looks pretty solid.
It says something about how strong the Democratic registration is in that district.
It says a lot about that.
Up in Cloverdale, as we mentioned, 2 seats open in the city council, 2 incumbents, and it looks like only Marianne Brigham is going to survive. Bob Cox falling a little bit further behind, and it appears that Melanie Bagby and James Lucchini are the most likely ones to claim that second seat. We don't have a way of knowing exactly what the numbers are in those races, but it may shake out a little bit more when we have further ballots to count. In Cotati, 6 candidates and some familiar names among them. George Barrich has been on the council, off the council, resigned from the council, and is trying again, but it doesn't look like his success is going to repeat from a previous race. John Deloso, Susan Harvey, and Wendy Skillman.
Incumbents are doing pretty good. This is a little closer race here in Healdsburg with Gary Plas in third place, really.
He's
3 seats, but 15, 14, these kind of numbers, it's not decided yet.
It's interesting in this race. Usually there's a couple of candidates in a larger field like this who fall well out of the pack.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be happening. I think that speaks to the strength of the whole field. In the Petaluma City Council, we saw this earlier, didn't talk about it much. The 3 incumbents, more or less running as a slate. Bill Wolpert trying to squeeze in and add a new voice to the City Council majority. He's got a fighting chance, it looks like.
But Bruce, so many years we've watched the Petaluma Council with really intense fights, town divided. Things have quieted down a lot in Petaluma.
Yeah, there's still a good deal of divide, I think, between the mayor and the council majority.
Yeah. But this numbers, at least this year, this has been a pretty quiet campaign.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kathy Miller is just seeking a second term, but Mike Healy's been around for a little while.
Oh, yeah.
And clearly the longer-term incumbency seems to have some shirt tails. And in Sebastopol, still waiting for numbers. That's a race. There's 2 seats open and no incumbent, so that's a rarity.
And a write-in, and a strong write-in.
A strong write-in. A former mayor who joined the race at the very, well, I guess I could even say after the last minute.
Well, apparently he looked at the list and said it needed something else, and he had it.
And so he certainly has the experience. He's pretty well connected, and when we have some numbers, we'll see how well that's paying off for him. In the town of Sonoma, 2 incumbents up for grabs, but it looks like newcomer Amy Harrington is going to displace one of them. And as we noted earlier, Lori Gallen is the trailing candidate, and it appears that Harrington and Cook will be the new members of the Sonoma City Council going forward. Windsor, again, 2 seats available, but we have 5 candidates there, and in this case, the 2 incumbents holding a pretty commanding start.
Yeah.
And clearly, there seems to be a certain degree of satisfaction reflected in the numbers that we're seeing.
Well, Deborah Fudge certainly knows Windsor. She's been a 5-time mayor, a longtime SMART director, ran for supervisor, unsuccessfully though.
Twice, but seems to have a solid base of support in her hometown. And with that, we're going to come back to the studio here where we're welcoming our next visitor, and very happy to have her with us. Julie Combs is here from the Santa Rosa City Council. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Hi, thank you for having me here tonight.
So you've had a lively few weeks in Santa Rosa this past month or two.
It's been a busy campaign, and it's been an unusual campaign.
It kind of ramped up toward the end in a big way.
We had an individual who donated over $200,000 to an independent expenditure to influence the outcome of our election.
And you normally have a donation limit, don't you?
We have a donation limit of $500 that stayed in place, but independent expenditures are different than IEs.
And there's some question as whether that was even within the rules as it played out.
Well, we have an individual who has filed an FPPC complaint. So it will be interesting to see the result of that. Of course, it won't affect the result of this election.
It's unusual, to say the least, to see a city council race when there are so many things on the table being dominated by one particular issue like this.
It is, and of course the issue, there was also a lot of money coming in from the California Apartment Association.
This is rent control.
It was rent stabilization, yes. I think that our community has been having a conversation about what kind of community we wanted to be. Did we want everybody to be able to live and afford to be able to live in our community, or were we going to price some people out? And I championed the rent stabilization ordinance. And the Apartment Association, of course, and some other people were concerned about that. And they tried to buy a seat, but it looks like it has not worked. So knock on wood, it did.
For the benefit of our substantial audience outside the city of Santa Rosa, what does the ordinance that Santa Rosa is putting in place attempt to do?
The ordinance attempts to first ensure that any landlord receives fair market return on their investment. So that's guaranteed. It's part of the law. But the other half of it is that it protects tenants from increases greater than 3% a year. We were having increases over 10% a year. and as much as 33%.
But this only applies to a certain segment of the housing.
Yes, there's a state law, Costa-Hawkins, that limits rent stabilization to only apply to units that were built before 1995.
Before 95.
Before
No, not new
1995.
buildings.
No, and there's some wisdom in that because then it doesn't dampen new construction. We want housing has 3 Ps. The first P is protect tenants. The second P is preserve existing affordable housing. And the third P is produce housing. So we all agree we're going to produce housing. That's clearly on the agenda. And we've been taking good steps to preserve the housing that we have. But we didn't have any tenant protections. So we wanted to add a just cause for eviction ordinance and a rent stabilization ordinance.
So has Santa Rosa become a lightning rod on this issue for the rest of the state?
The Bay Area as a whole has a number of ordinances regarding rent stabilization and just cause for eviction going this election. And I think that we have become a focus because ours was one of the stronger ones in the region.
Any other towns in Sonoma County have it?
Sebastopol just stared exploring, but no other town. They haven't passed it fully yet. They put the moratorium in to protect their tenants while they have the conversation. And we did that, but because of the petition drive that was successful, and I think a deceptive petition drive, that's also, there's a complaints and investigation going on about that petition drive. It was not on this ballot, but we hope to put it on a future ballot.
There was a lot of conversation in the past year about homelessness in Santa Rosa,
Yes.
and that seemed to kind of get morphed into the rent control issue, and the other pieces of the
Yes.
homeless problem have kind of overshadowed by that.
I wouldn't say overshadowed. We have been moving forward, and it was interesting to me, both Ernesto Olivares, who is also in the top 4, and I served on our homeless subcommittee. And we've really been moving forward. We recently passed an ordinance to allow sleeping in cars in parking lots at benevolent communities, like at churches, with some regulation about how that happens. So we, instead
Which
of...
is something the homeless folk advocates have been seeking for some time.
Yes, so we now have a safe camping and safe sleeping program.
I had a chance to ride on one of the early smart test trains.
Yes.
But I went from Sonoma Airport to downtown Santa Rosa, and I was blown away by the homeless encampments along the right-of-way.
Yes.
And I know that I talked to the chief of security of SMART, and they said that's a very severe problem because the darn things are going to go 79 miles an hour.
It's dangerous, yes.
But they're going to move. Where are they going to move to?
Well, that's what we're trying to solve. Obviously, the long-term solution to homelessness is housing. So the housing construction is really critical for us to take on in the next 4 years.
Will there be some of these folks are frankly substance abuse folks or have psychological problems? How do you address that?
So we're hoping that the governor's recent funding of a mental health housing initiative will help us with that. Obviously, we're looking to the county for additional supportive services in mental health. But the other piece of it is this camping program that we're talking about. This is a place for people to go and be safe while they wait for our construction projects to happen. But I should say, our homeless count is down 25%. We've gone from 4,000 homeless to 3,000 in our homeless count. So we have been working on homelessness. People have a sense of it being more apparent because we had to move folks off of the tracks and off of the creeks.
Well, there's the chronic homeless and homeless. I know there's a
Yes.
difference there. What's the chronic homeless situation?
And 86% of our homeless are from Sonoma County. They became homeless here, and we have a lot of them who have been homeless more than 8 years. It's going to take some time to bring those people in.
Lastly, Julie, I want to ask you, we've got 4 open seats, only 2 incumbents. There's going to be some new blood on the council with you, and it looks like a couple of young guys with a lot of energy are lining up to join you. How does that change the complexion of your work environment?
I'm really looking forward to it. I am very excited about both Chris Rogers and Jack Tibbetts. Chris has a lot of experience with the legislature. He's worked with Mike McGuire, Lynn Woolsey, and many others. I think he's a very knowledgeable guy. We're going to count on him for doing his homework and for reaching up and down the legislature. I think he's going to be great.
And am I correct? Jack Tibbetts is the executive director of the St. Vincent de Paul Society of Sonoma County?
He is, that's right. And he's the son of Nick Tibbetts, who is a developer in the community. He has a lot of understanding of how we're going to get homeless services built.
Yeah, a lot of folks don't know what St. Vincent de Paul does, but
Yes.
they really do outreach for the perhaps the less served people in the community.
They do, and they have a wonderful feeding program, and he's instituted a coat collection program for the winter. So I personally think that the results that you're seeing in our election are results that really mandate that we're going in the right direction, that we need to handle housing and homelessness issues, and that the three of us at the top of the polling and the four of us total have all been working on those issues.
Congratulations on a looks like a good win.
Thank you. Yeah, I really think we've been told a message from
So
our
this
community.
will be a second term for you. You still having fun?
Yes, I am. I wouldn't be doing it if I wasn't.
One last question before we let you go. I remember when you first came in, one of the things you did was to take ask your constituents for an assessment of what would make them happy.
Yes.
That
Yes.
the city could do. So what did you find, and what have you been able to do about that?
Yes. Well, the housing and homelessness rose to the top pretty quickly. And the other one, of course, is roads. And I'm still struggling with how we're going to solve the road problem without having Measure A from the previous election pass. So we're working on it.
Julie, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Julie Combs, who is a member of the Santa Rosa City Council, headed back for a second term, and with some new fellow council members to join her there. You've been watching KRCB's live election night coverage. I'm KRCB News Director Bruce Robinson, along with our senior election analyst Dick Spotswood. We'll be taking a short break here in just a moment, and then we'll return with more candidates, more coverage, and more results. Before we get away, though, Dick, let's take a quick look at these last state races one more time before we cut away. We did want to notice that as things go on, here's that Jared Huffman's lead is even increasing.
I think we usually come on first thing and we report the results in the congressional races, and in the deep blue North Bay, North Coast congressional race, once again, Jared Huffman has been reelected to a 2-year term.
And likewise, Mike Thompson in the adjacent district, an equally commanding win, in this case over a Republican opponent, and that's with more than half the electorate in for that. It seems to be pretty well decided at this point. A couple other races we haven't touched on before. We'll mention them briefly right now. In Napa County, there are 2 seats open on the American Canyon City Council, and incumbent Joan Bennett and Kenneth Leary are ahead in that field, but it's a very close race. That could split any number of ways, with just a little more than a third of the vote in so far. And up the road in St. Helena, again, a pair of incumbents seeking re-election, but in this case, not so successfully, it would appear. Jeff Ellsworth and Mary Korberstein are the leading candidates in that race, and since we have 100% of the ballots counted in the town of St. Helena,
2 new council members.
I think we can call this one.
I think so. That's a really tough when you're incumbent for both of them to lose.
Yeah.
That's a statement by the voters.
In the city of Napa, Scott Sedgley, one of the incumbents, appears to be back on the job after tonight. With 95% of the vote in, though, it appears that Mary Louris is going to be edged out by newcomer Doris Gentry, who will be joining the city council over there in the city of Napa.
Well, Sausalito, it's really not much of a race. One of the candidates Sam Rubin has pulled out, and so there are 3 seats. Only one incumbent, Ray Withey, running. 2 incumbents, Tom Theodoros and Linda Pfeiffer, have retired. So Joan Cox and Joe Burns win. Sam Rubin, it's kind of an insult to Joe Burns. Sam Rubin pulled out of the race, didn't campaign. He got 17%. That's 26% of the votes running.
And Joan Cox appears to be a very strong newcomer.
A very strong newcomer, yes. She's a solid candidate.
Okay. Well, we want to, as I say, take a little bit of a break now and get everything updated and refreshed. So when we come back, we'll have some additional guests to talk to, and we'll bring you up on the latest numbers at that time. I'm Bruce Robinson here with Dick Spotswood. This is KRCB's live election coverage coming your way on KRCB Public Radio and Television.
From now on, I wish to be called Victoria.
Queen Victoria.
North Bay Bountiful, a Bay Area initiative from KRCB, explores the environmental issues that affect our lives.
We have natural hives all around us. It indicates the health of an ecosystem.
We explain the food systems and innovative agricultural practices that are changing the ways we grow, sell, and select the food we eat.
These seeds have been around for thousands of years. We want them to be available to us forever.
Watch television programs, listen to radio reports, explore our website, and take us with you on the KRCB free mobile app.
You got that one?
We're going to have to change how we use resources and what kinds of resources we use.
North Bay Bountiful from KRCB North Bay Public Media. Cultivate, celebrate, connect.
And welcome back to KRCB's live coverage of today's California general election. I'm Bruce Robinson, along with Dick Spotswood, and right now we're going to review a couple of numbers for you before we invite our next guest onto the set. So reviewing the races that are of most interest to us here in the North Bay. We're looking first at the Sonoma County Supervisorial District. Numbers have not changed since we came on the air. Noreen Evans trailing Linda Hopkins in that race, but with only a very small proportion of the vote in. It's been stuck at 57% on your screen. Not sure that that is, in fact, an accurate number for the votes as a whole that have been counted to this point in time. In the Marin County Supervisor race, District 4, that's also their West County district, a tighter race between Dennis Rodoni and Dominic Rossi, but from the start we have seen Rodoni with a slight lead that he has been holding throughout.
You know, Bruce, I'm usually critical of Sonoma County's vote tonight, but Marin County's been not very fast either. We only have 30.9% of the votes cast in Marin County, and we've been fixed at that for a good hour. And these are absentee votes. You're not seeing really any numbers from the actual polling places. These are numbers that came in and were probably available about 8:30. Absentees, what we call mail voting now, not so much absentees, but mail voting. 70% of the people, by the way, in these two counties, about 70% vote by mail.
Napa County obviously doing a much more efficient job of getting all of their votes tallied. Of course, they have a little more compact geographic area to work with. But here, one of the upsets of this evening, it appears that incumbent Mark Luce will not be going back to his seat on the Board of Supervisors. That will instead be taken over by the younger Ryan Gregory.
You know, one of the things interesting about local races in the North Bay, Bruce, is that there's very little polling. And so it's really the old-fashioned way. We don't know what happens till election night. So a fellow like Mark Luce, you know, he doesn't have that kind of warning that state Senate candidates and assembly candidates have when you're in trouble or you're not in trouble quite often.
As we mentioned when Julie Combs was with us, she is leading in the Santa Rosa City Council race along with Jack Tibbetts and Chris Rogers, and fellow incumbent Ernesto Oliveras appear to be the four people making the cut in that particular race. Measure Y, good news for book lovers in Sonoma County, passing strongly with 70% support in the county here, and we're happy to see that in my household. Measure J for funding for regional parks, 62% in favor. All these numbers have been fairly static since we came on, so they haven't seen any changes there. Measure K passing handily. Measure M to ban GMO crops passing also, although not quite such a large measure. And finally, the preschool education and healthcare service measure A in Marin County, leading but not by quite enough.
It needs 2/3 to pass. And the numbers have stayed flat at 33%, so we're still waiting to hear some more. It's not out, but it's not where it wants to be.
And lastly, a couple of the significant state propositions that we've been talking about throughout the evening. Very little contest, it seems, in the notion of bringing back bilingual education to public schools, undoing a previous statewide initiative, and that has very strong support. Proposition 64, one of the most hotly debated measures on the ballot this year. It seems to be passing, as the polls indicated it would, but not by an overwhelming margin. And that sets us up to introduce our next guest. We're happy to have you joining us here. Connie Logan is here from the Sonoma County Growers Alliance. You obviously have been watching that one very closely.
Yes, we have.
And your organization was actually hoping it doesn't pass.
Well,
or at least some of you.
You know, this is the hardest part of the conversation.
our organization and many of the members, myself included, we want to see adult use in California. There's absolutely no question in that whatsoever. It was the questioning of, is this the right proposition and is this the right time for adult use to come to California? While we wanted to see momentum on the federal level, we were also looking at the trade-offs in, should we get adult use today with this proposition? What happens tomorrow with the existing economy in our environment?
Well, there was a story in, I think, the San Francisco Chronicle indicating that they thought that the price of marijuana would decline by up to 90% if 64 passed. That makes sense?
Absolutely. I mean, you look to Colorado and you can look to Washington to see the impacts of adult use on the marketplace. Colorado and Washington are obviously very different states than California. California has a very healthy and vibrant pre-existing industry that is underground and trying to come above board. And so we were dealing with different issues than those two states. However, when you look at what has happened to the retail adult use side of the market versus the medical market, the retail market in Colorado is nosediving at a rapid rate, while the medical market, the price,
yeah. Not the market.
Not the market, just the price of the cannabis, and the market itself is still alive and well, and there's a lot of purchasing happening. But the medical cannabis has only gone down 5%. So
why is that?
Well, you have a much more regulated marketplace. There's consistency, there's quality, and when you're into the game of adult use and recreational activity, it's a numbers game. It's a race to the bottom by default of trying to make the most money off of your profit margins.
It's been suggested that in a unregulated recreational use market, that the cannabis business would follow the model of the wine business, that you would have big producers at the low end and the boutique, high quality, specialized product would be able to maintain its niche in an upper level. Is that a reasonable expectation?
We have 53,000 estimated farmers existing right now in California. How many of them can fit on one shelf in any dispensary for boutique high-end quality to compete with something like a $2 chuck? So we're really looking, the intent with the Medical Cannabis Regulation Safety Act that was passed last year by leadership in our legislation was to convert the existing underground market into regulated marketplace. Why? Because the industry, unregulated, is doing an incredible amount of damage to the environment. They're not paying taxes. We have public safety issues everywhere. And so we need this existing tens of thousands of farmers and operators and distributors and brokers to participate in the regulated market and then reward them for following those regulations and doing the right thing. When you put in front of them a marketplace that is well-funded and coming in on a large corporate scale, who's going to put the $50,000 to $100,000 in to compete on this small scale? So we really run the risk of driving that underground market deeper.
Well, from the early returns, it looks like 64 is going to pass.
Yes.
So how is it's going to be, wake up tomorrow morning and say, we're in a new world.
Absolutely. So tomorrow we have, we roll up our sleeves and we start talking about what does adult use implementation look like in Sonoma County? How are we going to make sure that this is a fair and balanced market here? Because all we can do is really make our impact on a local level and hope that we can replicate that model throughout California. So tomorrow we start talking about our policy goals, and then we also add to our 2017 workshops how to start your adult use business and start training those operators who want to break out of the medical model and into the adult use, give them the tools to be successful, because that's the only way we're going to ensure that Sonoma County's economy is benefiting from this.
Is there going to be, I guess Healdsburg had a measure on the ballot to tax marijuana this time.
Cloverdale.
Cloverdale. Is there going to be a land rush of municipalities to do the same?
We're going to need that tax money in order to provide the services to help this market expand, to help this industry actually come into compliance. So I think that, yes, we're going to see Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. I'm sure they'll be putting something in front of us in March, and hopefully we can start with reasonable taxes. We're now looking at 15% tax from Prop 64. So you take a brand new industry with thousands of operators who've never paid taxes, and you put in front of them 15% and plus the flour and the leaf tax, and then the local taxes, and all of a sudden you're looking at 20 up to 30% tax right out the gate. And what industry is thriving on a 30% tax?
Well, alcohol is pretty heavy taxes there on alcohol.
Not that heavy.
The one notion I've heard suggested is that in anticipation that 64 might pass, collectives would be a response to it that would offer some protection to small growers. How realistic is that?
So collectives have been the kind of historic model that we've been using with Prop 215 and SB 420. And I think what we're really seeing is cooperatives. So the passing of the Medical Cannabis Regulation Safety Act last year has given, because now cannabis is being identified as an agricultural product. We're the only state in the nation to have made that statement. We now can treat this like an agricultural product, from working with the California Department of Food and Ag to allowing farmers to work like cooperatives. And it is really going to be one of the strongest ways that small farmers across the state will be able to take the next step into the statewide marketplace, is by working together, which the good actors in this industry have always worked together, and now they're just going to have to learn how to do business together.
Yeah.
It's a little different endeavor.
Yeah.
It'll be a difficult transition, I'm sure, though.
Yeah, I mean, any change for any industry is disruptive, but that's why there are organizations like the Sonoma County Growers Alliance and the California Growers Association and many small advocacy groups throughout the state. They're there to help with that transition, and a smooth transition is what we need.
Well, a good way to look at it is this is the opposite of prohibition. It's the explosion of the industry.
Yes. Yeah, and so we have a lot of work to do in 2017 to make sure that this is balanced, and that we didn't gain the success of decriminalization and ending prohibition on the backs of tens of thousands of farmers, but that those farmers are actually included, and we see some changes.
I'm sure you've been planning for this, but you still have a lot of work ahead of you. I can see that.
Oh, we've got a lot of work, but our organization's young. We're not even 2 years old yet. When we founded, there were no license types. We didn't know if there would be something to pass at the end of 2015, and within 1 year of it passing, we have 18 licenses and a blossoming new industry. And we went from being the Sonoma County Growers Alliance to, okay, it's coming on 2017, we are the Cannabis Business Alliance. Really, we've got to find a way to be as dynamic as the industry, and it's moving so quickly.
Well, it's gone from the counterculture to an industry.
Yes, absolutely. But I think the counterculture will always be thriving, right? It's at the heart
it's a
of
mindset,
the.
too.
It is a mindset.
Donnie, thanks very much for being with us tonight, and good luck in figuring out your path going forward. I'm sure you've got your work cut out for you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
We are going to take a look at some of the other races and see what new numbers we have for you as we look at the U.S. Senate race. This one hasn't changed much. Kamala Harris clearly the successful candidate in that race. In the State Senate District 3, Bill Dodd now up with a 37% of the vote in, holding on to a strong lead, so it appears that he will be stepping up from the State Assembly to the State Senate, district that includes the the eastern part of Sonoma County. In the Assembly District, Bill Dodd's old district, Cecilia Aguilar-Curry, I didn't say that very well, will be succeeding Bill Dodd, maintaining a Democrat in that seat. That's a little more than half of the vote in. Jim Wood, one of the people who had a voice in creating these new cannabis regulations, along with our State Senator Mike McGuire, he'll be going back to Sacramento for a second term.
Former Healdsburg mayor.
And yes.
And a dentist.
Mark Levine, no problem there.
They switched the numbers accurately this time. They had put them with the opposite.
They actually, yes, we had that caught earlier.
As an aside, in the primary election count, Sonoma County, the guy that came in third was a guy named Todd Hooper. He was a Republican. He didn't do very well. But for a moment of glory for Todd Hooper, the Sonoma County Registrar of Voters posted, because somebody sent me the posting on the internet, that Hooper was landsliding with 70% of the vote in the primary. He must just heart attack of joy, and then 2 minutes later they take it down.
So Mistakes can happen just about anywhere, it seems.
Yes, indeed.
Up in Cloverdale, same numbers we've been looking at for the last couple of times. Mary Ann Brigham going on to a new term, and Melanie Bagby and James Lucchini looking to be the front runners for that second seat, and duking it out between them. In Cotati, incumbents John Deloso, Susan Harvey, and Wendy Skillman heading back for another term, each of them.
No race in Rohnert Park this time.
Rohnert Park had 3 candidates and 3 seats, so they opted out of the election and saved themselves a little money. Yeah. So, since there, I think that the status quo was serving the city pretty well. Incumbents up in in Healdsburg, Sean McCaffrey is in the top of the pack there. David Hagley, a newcomer, who I believe has been on the planning commission in town, looking to move up, and Gary Plass, 2-term incumbent, looks like he will be termed out.
Well, pretty close though.
It's still quite close.
Early returns, when they're that kind of close, it could go. I'd hate to call that.
In Petaluma, 3 incumbents on the top of the pack. Bill Wolpert trying to break in, and he and third place candidate Gabe Kearney are pretty neck and neck at this point, so we'll keep an eye on that one to see if anything changes there. Apparently the ballots from Sebastopol went south instead of north, so we don't know what is happening in the town of Sebastopol at this point.
Or east, actually.
In the city of Sonoma, Amy Harrington, a newcomer, is the leading candidate there. Incumbent David Cook, as you can see in the second slot, Lori Galley in third, and Jack Wagner rounding out the field there. And finally, up in Windsor, Deb Fudge and Bruce Okrepke are the 2 incumbents, members of the city council there, both seeking another term and apparently successful in doing so. Michael Wall in third place should anything change.
I'm just checking here between Petaluma, there's only 165 votes between Gabe Kearney and Bill Wolpert.
So that's certainly something to keep a close eye on.
And only 3 of 25 precincts.
So in a year where things are turning over big time on the national level, we see the hometown voters, for the most part, are sort of sticking with what they know.
In Sonoma and Marin, Napa's having some changes, though. With the supervisor going down.
But their city council races, again, the incumbents, for the most part, are prevailing.
No question in Sonoma County. If you think about it, I did a talk this election to a club in Sausalito at the Sausalito Yacht Club. You look out when you're giving a talk at the Sausalito Yacht Club and look out the window, it's pretty hard to be upset. And the same thing goes for Sonoma County. You just drive down the road in Sonoma County and you say, boy, this place is hot. These are not folks that are angry. We've got the results, the national results are what they are, but in Marin County, Hillary Clinton's approaching 80%. In Sonoma County, she's approaching 75%. These are not your angry voters, because this is the successful part of modernization and globalization. And so they aren't angry. Why should they be? The employment is down, the economy is up. And California has kind of been used to diversity. We're a West Coast port of entry. It's Chinese folks in San Francisco is hardly a shock.
We're the bubble within the bubble.
California is certainly a bubble. Coastal California is certainly a bubble. I think when you see the map tomorrow, you'll see that interior California is more like
it's a lot redder.
Nebraska.
Yeah.
But coastal California, and that includes what used to be the Republican San Diego and Orange County areas, are booming. And so when things are good, I was in Santa Barbara 2 weeks ago. Pretty tough to be angry in Santa Barbara. It is really glowing. Town was booming.
Yeah. We haven't seen numbers. Maybe you've had some idea. We just talked at some length about the cannabis proposition here in California, but California was one of, I think, 9 different states that were dealing with marijuana measures in one form or another, whether medical or for recreational use. And California is certainly the biggest population center doing that.
No question.
This, somewhat like gay marriage maybe a few years ago, seems to be one of those issues that has all of a sudden very close to critical mass in terms of public opinion in this country.
Yes, part of it may be that the media is centered here in New York, places which are very open to this, and people tend to be very, I don't want to say supportive, but influenced by the media, and the media is influenced by the place the media is made, California and New York. Yeah. So we tend to be leaders in those sort of things.
It may also have something to do with the fact that as Gavin Newsom framed the issue, it was an anti-prohibition approach to, and one of the things that Proposition 64 does is a form of amnesty for people who have in fact been jailed on minor drug-related charges that are.
Sonoma County, by the way, the vote is with a pretty good vote, 48,000 to 32,000 on marijuana, 60% for in Sonoma County. I know there's been some objection in the growers community because just what our guest talked about, the decrease in the market. But 60% of Sonoma folks, even a little bit higher than the state number, cast a yes vote for Prop 64.
So are we in fact seeing a sea change, you think, in attitudes around this, or will this in fact be one of those things that was trending one way and now maybe the tide has shifted?
Well, there are also regional aspects. You know, medical marijuana, you think, what's the logical place to buy medical marijuana? You buy your other medicines, the drugstore. Why can't we do that? Because federal law prohibits it, cast it as the same light as heroin. Californians regard that as ridiculous. Much of the country is slower than we are, and is very fearful of that. That's part of the problem, the social change that's coming across the country that we're comfortable with, that so many folks are uncomfortable with. That's what's dividing this country.
Another interesting point of divide that didn't get talked about much in the campaign, certainly a big topic of conversation here, the whole climate change issue. Virtually ignored at the national level, passionately engaged with here in Sonoma County. I think we're going to see some further angst around that now.
Angst will be, I think, if climate change is your number one issue, then you're in very bad shape. Because Donald Trump is not going to be a supporter of doing anything about climate change.
It's a hoax, right?
It's a hoax, or it's probably a hoax.
You know, and you can blame whoever you choose for it.
That's right. So those folks, it's a big loss, and it's once again, votes have consequences, and that's the reality. And I think people are going to understand that very important lesson tomorrow morning. Votes have consequences. So you can huff and puff all you want about climate change. The United States government is not going to be endorsing or supporting protocols from around the world. They're going to be getting out of those kind of protocols. Period. Votes have consequences.
And sometimes the consequences are long-lasting, shall we say.
They can be horrific.
Yeah. In my household, the Brexit vote was watched very closely and with considerable dismay, particularly the morning after reaction and the regrets that were expressed then. Do you think there's going to be anything of that sort of reaction after the fact in this country, or the folks who made it happen did so with their eyes open?
Yeah, I think the folks that did so pretty much did it with their eyes open. And in Brexit, there's some of that, but really most of the folks that were voting in Britain were voting for Brexit, are still against Brexit. The Prime Minister is taking the position that she's going to follow through. There doesn't seem to be any controversy about that. I know there's a lawsuit about having Parliament vote on it, but that's not the point. The point is, I think that pretty much the folks in Britain that voted for Brexit, a majority, I'm not sure they knew what they were doing, but they're still happy with it. And I suspect that for the next 6 months...
It hasn't kicked in yet either.
Well, that's right. And I suspect for the implications of it. And I suspect the initial reaction of Donald Trump voters will be great. You know, certainly the fears of the election being rigged went away.
Yeah.
By definition.
Yeah. There's another one he got wrong.
But the question are the implications. If we have a recession, because of the crash of the market and people are apprehensive about investing, might not be what they thought. If we start having, having foreign entanglements or lack of foreign entanglements, but very bad situations, might not be good. The implications, the question is, can Donald Trump change? You know, the real idea is most women will tell you men at a certain age don't change. He's 70. Very few 70-year-olds change.
Well, let's bring it back home then and see what we can look at in terms of numbers here. It's getting later into the evening, and perhaps some of the numbers that we have been seeing fairly stable so far may begin to show some difference. Not this one. We're still waiting for updates on that particular race, one of the ones that people here in western Sonoma County have been eyeing very closely and don't have much news for them quite yet. Similarly, in western Marin County, Dennis Rodoni and Dominic Rossi, not much change there. You know, I'm remembering in June, the Marin County Elections Office sort of broke with this tradition and was almost as slow as Sonoma. That appears to be a year-long phenomenon.
I will have a statement in tomorrow's morning paper which will be proven wrong. The statement is that Sonoma should take a look at Marin. Obviously, what happened is that Marin took a look at Sonoma and decided that we were not going to have timely election returns. Sonoma quite proudly says that our job is not to have quick returns, it's to have accurate returns. When I spoke to the head of the Registrar of Voters Office, I asked why not have accurate and quick returns, kind of like San Mateo County does, and they did not have an answer.
Currently, quick returns seem to be the case in Napa County. Of course, it's a much more compact county, and that may have something to do with these high numbers we're seeing. 94% returned, and Ryan Gregory will be unseating Mark Luce on the Board of Supervisors. A bit of a surprise there. In Santa Rosa, same four top candidates as we have been looking at all evening. Jack Tibbetts, a newcomer to electoral politics, but as noted, from a prominent family involved in politics in Santa Rosa for a long time. And Julie Combs, Ernesto Oliveras, and Chris Rogers appear to be the prevailing candidates. Don Taylor got a lot of money from the Apartment Association and other forces who were opposed to the rent stabilization measure. It appears that was not money well spent for
But
the
Oliveras
advocates.
also got money from them, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, but not quite to the same extent, as I understand it.
By the way, Sonoma County voted again for repeal of the death penalty, 54 to 46 on Prop 62.
Are we surprised?
No.
Nah, that's liberal Sonoma County at it again. Also at it in terms of supporting our libraries, a sales tax to see hours expanded, a return to library services on Monday, which is eagerly awaited by a great many people, and the funds appear to be in place to make that happen. Looking at some of the other measures here in Sonoma County, I'm going to go from right to left at this point. Measure M to ban genetically modified crops in Sonoma County. That is holding on to that 54 to 46% lead. The community separators are enjoying overwhelming support with 82% in favor. And Measure J, funding for regional parks, having a majority, but perhaps not quite enough to get the job done. And here to talk with us about that, I'd like to welcome Carol Hart to the set with us. Thank you for coming in, Carol. And you've been committed to Measure J for all this time.
Yes.
I don't know, we don't have numbers on how big a share of the vote that is, but
yeah, we're not hearing. I mean, I'm not sure what's going on, frankly. The last update that we got, thank you so much, was that we were at 62.5% with only 19,000 votes counted.
Yeah, it
and
seems that the West County votes are very slow coming in for some
yeah,
reason.
and of course the West County is
No
a great area for
votes.
parks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we really don't know where we're going to be. But frankly, I mean, it's a great turnout for parks. We really appreciate the support and people, the value that people place in parks in this county. So,
There was some criticism, correct me if I'm wrong, but the county, the tax would be on the unincorporated areas.
Right,
And I know that one criticism was the folks that live in the incorporated areas
right.
are going to benefit from the parks. Why shouldn't they pay? And I know the complicated of having cities versus counties, but what was your answer
Yeah, it's
to
really
that?
so simple because the reality is I met with the cities early on and the cities were clear that if the tax encompasses the entire county, naturally the city would want a big chunk, probably at least half,
City parks.
for the cities. So, to me it seemed like a great approach. This isn't a parcel tax, this is a sales tax, and the reality is the majority of it would be paid by tourists that are coming in and going to wineries and expensive restaurants, whereas residents like me that live in the unincorporated area do most of our big shopping in the cities. Therefore, we wouldn't even have to pay the tax. So to me, it seemed like a win-win. I will say that I think probably one of the worst things that happened in this otherwise, I think, fantastic campaign, had tons of support, was the really quite inexplicable opposition by the Press Democrat. And I think that if we don't end up making it, it would be because of that, on a pension issue, which frankly has nothing to do with this specific sales tax.
Because they were arguing that it's an a la carte tax that allows the agencies to skate the pension problem. Is that the gist of their argument?
Well, not exactly. I don't understand because earlier when Measure A, which actually was the roads tax, which as you recall got 34%, the Press Democrat indicated that they would prefer a specific tax, that they would support a specific tax, as they did with the libraries. So, to me, if we end up a point or two behind, I can't help but look at the questionable position of the Press Democrat. One
of the interesting things in the measure for me was to see that extensive list of projects that are queued up and ready to proceed. At some point, I assume you'll go forward with as many of those as possible with whatever funding there is to work with, but clearly it would be a lot easier if you had a bigger bankroll.
Unfortunately, it's not a matter of easier or harder, it's a matter of possible versus impossible. The reality is that regional parks has been 50 years that we have been, acquiring land. We were lucky enough to have the open space district measure passed and acquire new lands for parks that have been waiting to be transferred to regional parks. And those are expensive, and I just, for those moving those properties over, we need to find the money to manage those in perpetuity. State Parks is proposing to charge fees at the coast. We were helping to avoid that, and now if Measure J doesn't pass, that's going to be tough. And then there's trail projects like the Sonoma Valley Trail between Sonoma and Santa Rosa. That was really such a great project. We've managed to raise money for that, but that's a big project. And then there's Andes Unity Park that there's so many things that we need to do, unfortunately, and all these things we're hoping to get funding with Measure J, but it looks like we might, it's not done deal yet, but it looks like we might fall a little short on that.
If it goes down, Plan B, come back 2 years?
I was just talking, I really don't know. We see so many things, and I just saw on your screen that the Marin early childhood education tax seems to be having, I think that what we're finding is that to get over, it may be multiple times. Like the libraries, it sounds like is actually working.
Yeah, second time was the charm.
Yeah, and maybe we will have to just be real with the cities and say, look, to support our park system, you're just going to have to, we're going to figure it out. But I don't know the answer to that, where we're headed.
You took time off from your job
Right.
with the county as the Parks Director, pursuing this, supporting this as a public citizen.
Yes.
Do you take it personally if it doesn't pass?
To tell you the truth, I'm so overwhelmed tonight with what's going on in the national election. We've all been so blown out by that. It's hard for me to even wrap my head around what's going on here.
To a certain extent, it seems to me a lot of California propositions this time, which in the past years have been very controversial, and counties as well, that the presidential election sucked the wind out of everything, that everybody concentrated on that. And we look at a list of death penalty stuff. You just didn't see a lot about that, or hear a lot of people talking about it. All they concentrated on was the presidential election. And now tomorrow, all they're going to concentrate on is the presidential election.
And all of us, because let's face it, what's going on here in the county is obviously great importance to us, but when we think about our environment and our national park system, our public lands, and really what the Trump has indicated his plan was, which was essentially a decimation of those incredible public assets. I just, to me, I have to say I'm focused on that tonight. And I'm still hopeful about Measure J, but I think all of us that live here in Sonoma County that care about parks and our environment and our natural resources have to be very concerned about the direction of this presidential election.
It's true.
19, I just see right here, and they're indicating it's 237 out of 313 precincts.
Yeah.
And it's 62.4% yes, 37.6% no.
Yeah, so it hasn't changed. Is it about 19,000 votes total?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it hasn't changed in the last 2 hours.
Sonoma
I don't know what's
tends
going on.
not post it very often, and you may be up for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible West County could come in and push us up over where we need to be. I don't know. But I do think it takes multiple times sometimes with these measures, so it could be. But the regional parks are such an amazing asset for this county. The parks are so critical to our economy, to our health. People love them. We have over 25,000 park members. And I think that this election and having Measure J has really caused a lot of people to think about our parks and the value, how amazing they are. And so I think going forward, we do have an opportunity to potentially go back to the voters and ask them for their support.
Well, Carol, thanks very much for being with us
so
tonight
much.
on a difficult evening on a lot of fronts.
I'm sure you all feel the same way. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
As we mentioned, numbers are kind of slow coming in here in Sonoma and also down in Marin County.
Well,
not so much over in Napa. Well, you have the numbers to look at there.
I have 41% in the supervisorial race, getting a little closer there in the 4th district, which is West Marin, Corte Madera, West Novato, and parts of San Rafael. And with 41.7%, it's now Dennis Verdoni, 52.9%, and Dominic Grassi, 46.9%. Getting a little closer there.
A little bit closer there. We wanted to bring you up to date on the ballot measures across the county line there in Napa County. where Measure Z, another sales tax for parks and open space, is also facing difficulty getting over that 2/3 hurdle. 62% support is good, but perhaps not enough. We talked earlier about the competing measures A and B that would attempt to do the same thing, but funded a little bit differently. The version of that measure supported by their county supervisors that would, I believe the language used, cost-effective measures, is enjoying more support, and the other measure has not been supported. We looked at that earlier. It was being supported to a lesser extent. Now the tide has flipped a little bit. Up in Healdsburg, the growth management ordinance is being embraced by a majority who say, no, don't change it. Batting the water fluoridation, also, no, don't change that either. So again, folks in Healdsburg seem to be liking things the way they are. Taxing cannabis in Cloverdale is a popular notion with 3-to-1 support there. And the folks in Cotati, very supportive of their urban growth boundary. So at this point, we're just going to bring it back to personalities in the West County. Linda Hopkins is here with us. We haven't seen you since June. You've been busy since then, and a rigorous few months.
Yes, it has. We've been working hard. I mean, walking precincts, phone banking. It's been a very, very busy 6 months.
That's a big precinct to walk, a big district to walk.
It is, yes. More than 30,000 homes that we knocked on.
Now, we know the numbers are still preliminary.
Yes.
Though, you know, your opponent, Noreen Evans, was here earlier, and she's run for council, Assembly, Senate. She's been through it. This is your first time.
It is.
So how was it?
It's been a wild ride. You know, it's of course been challenging because it's been a very ugly election cycle, as you could, you know, starting quite frankly with a national level, and I feel that that's sort of percolated down to the local races as well. And so, you know, there was a lot of mud flying. There were a lot of independent expenditure committees that kind of mucked things up. Yes, yes. Some cow pies too. So, but yet it's also been so gratifying. You know, getting to know people, getting to knock on doors that I would never have otherwise knocked on, and sometimes have really intimate and engaging conversations with potential constituents. So I've actually loved it.
Well, apparently they reciprocated.
They did. We are very hopeful. We're cautiously optimistic, I guess is the term that you're supposed to use, right?
Both of us, Bruce and I, have followed politics for years. It's far better to be ahead than behind at this stage of the game.
It's a good poll.
Good poll.
It's a very diverse district, and I'm wondering where you found your message changed as you talked to one area and another, where their concerns varied, and you had to maybe do a little homework on a new issue that wasn't something that was front and center closer to home.
Well, I think a lot of the unincorporated areas, such as along the Russian River corridor and along the Sonoma County coastline, tend to feel underrepresented just because they don't have the population density. And so, you know, and they also are all just sort of geographically isolated as well. And so talking to them about how we can kind of empower more self-government in unincorporated areas was very warmly received by those communities. I proposed a community improvement district that residents were just very, very excited about. And then, of course, in urban areas, we had talked a lot about affordable housing, but really that was countywide. I mean, even out in unincorporated Sonoma County, even at the Sea Ranch, you know, there's conversations about the tremendous lack of affordable housing.
And housing everywhere is a complicated process.
It is, very much so, yeah. And I don't think that we have one silver bullet policy solution to address affordable housing. So I introduced a sort of, I would say, broad spectrum of different new ideas. And they, again, were sort of different, you know, different ideas for different areas. So something like tiny homes might work well for farm workers, might not work well in, for instance, Roseland, where it's, you know, already very dense development.
You know, one of the things that changed probably is that in the prior administration, the Obama administration, the Department of Housing and Urban Affairs has been very aggressive on housing. I would think that in the Trump administration, they would be unaggressive on housing. I can think of a couple of people who might be potential HUD secretaries. Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino comes to mind. Certainly, I think Chris Christie, who could have been, will not be now. But that's going to be a big change. That's going to impact housing in some ways, do you think?
Absolutely, and I'm very, very, it's a very bittersweet night where we were very sort of, you know, excited about the results in the 5th District, you know, in our little campaign party that we held, but just devastated by the Trump news. And honestly, I think that it's not just housing. You look at climate change, that's a huge priority of mine, and I don't think that there will be any attention given whatsoever to climate change on the national level, which terrifies me, because we're really at that do or die point right now where we have to take action. I do not see a Trump administration taking action on climate change.
Well, he's already indicated it's a hoax.
Yeah, which is absurd. I mean, just talk to the scientific community. And there's been, you know, we've known about this for 30 years, actually, really, and had very, very strong scientific evidence for the last 15 years, but that beyond a doubt.
If you get out of the North Bay bubble to a certain extent, both you and Linda Evans Noreen Evans. Noreen Evans.
Happens a lot. I think there was some actress or
It's
something
just
with
one
that
of those
name.
things
Yes.
Are really not that far apart. Am I
Mhm.
correct?
Correct. Yes. No, I think we're actually we're lucky in the 5th District where we have a choice between two progressive environmentalist candidates who are both passionate about affordable housing, both passionate about the environment. The choice is much more stark on the national level, and I think that we're all very concerned in
So
the 5th
in your
District.
since the issues are fairly similar, it was more personality. What was the thing that divided the race?
You know, I
or
think
approach, maybe.
Yeah, I think that I brought a lot of new, fresh policy ideas. I think that people were really responsive to that. Things like junior second units, you know, a sort of streamlined granny unit process, looking at creating a new, more progressive, less regressive fee structure for affordable housing development in Sonoma County. Some of these ideas I think really caught on with the constituents, and we worked very, very hard to run a positive campaign, and I think that also resonated.
The negativity was done on your behalf.
Unfortunately.
And yet and certainly you benefited from it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any response to that?
Yeah, you know, I did not support that, and I actually sort of actively encouraged my supporters to maintain a positive policy-based dialogue. Unfortunately, some people took matters into their own hands. And that was actually very frustrating because we got some pushback too of people, you know, calling up our office and saying, how could you have sent out this attack piece? And we had to explain that by law we have literally no control over independent expenditure committees, and that's not something that we can influence.
Might it be, I appreciate that this is state law, but might the localities, County of Sonoma, start to urge our legislators to do something about the independent expenditure committees which so distort local elections?
Absolutely. I really do think that we need fundamental campaign finance reform in California and even locally. I mean, we could set different caps, you know, for instance, on campaign contributions. We could create an ethics sort of oversight committee as they've done in San Francisco. There are many things that we
But
could
the
do in
IEs,
Sonoma County.
the independents, that's
Yep.
you can run the most
True.
honorable campaign in the world, and Joe Dokes wants to fund you because he simply is
Santa Rosa's seen the circumvention there.
Right. I think it was more than 300,000. Was that true in Santa Rosa?
We heard earlier
in the well up in the 6 figures.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the bright spots in your district, I think, is what's happening in Roseland these days. And when you visit Roseland, when you take your message there, what kind of filter do you see that people are hearing this through now?
I would say very hopeful and optimistic. I think there's a lot of positive feelings about annexation right now, and it's really impressive that the city and the county are really so close. I mean, they are finally there, and it's taken decades of work. So I think that there's quite a bit of optimism in Roseland. We actually celebrated there. We were at La Fondita on Sebastopol Road. We had mariachi, the whole thing. It was a really fun night.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for being with us. We'll let you get back to your celebration if it's still going on.
Absolutely.
And good luck to you going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Especially if you get elected, come back in 4 years. We'd like to see you here at KRCB.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Once again, we'll take a quick look at some of the statewide propositions for you to update those. Not that there's been radical change, but the support for repealing the death penalty, just not there.
No, that's once again the punditry was off again. A lot of people thought that this was the time it was going to happen, and that the no vote had been decreasing in California. Apparently, it's stabilized. If anything, might have grown a little bit.
And but yet there's still a sense that it needs some tweaking, and that the measure to expedite the appeals process. Why that became an issue? Was that a smokescreen? Was that an attempt to confuse the repeal
the
issue?
fundamental problem is that the no folks had always, the people who have favored the abolition of the death penalty kind of concluded 15, 20 years ago that it was not going to happen. It was something, an emotional thing that was going to stay on the ballot. So the legal strategy had been to make the process so complicated that nobody would ever be executed. It's worked. The process is so complicated, we haven't executed anybody, I don't know, have we 10, 15 years?
Yep. I think the last one was in the 90s.
So the folks, many district attorneys saw that, and Prop 67 was an effort to streamline the process so that the appeals weren't interminable. And that's what 67's about.
And that seems to be enjoying a narrow majority support, but enough to carry it if that holds up.
That's right.
Let's also take a quick look at the statewide races that we've touched on earlier. No great drama here, but just to bring you up to speed, Jared Huffman easily winning another term in his district, which runs all the way up to the Oregon border.
It does. He's going to, of course, continue his frustration because it's going to be a solid, and so will Mike Thompson, it'll be a solidly Republican House of Representatives. Though, as Jared Huffman said when he was with us, he wasn't at all certain that House Speaker Paul Ryan would survive the Republican wave.
Not to say that his successor would be any easier to work with.
His successor would be less easier to work with, be the theory.
Yeah, yeah. See, who else do we have here to tell you about? We want to move on to the races over in Napa County. A couple of those we haven't touched on in a little while, but most of the electorate there is in, except it seems from American Canyon, where with a little more than 35% of the vote in, the two incumbents are locked in a close race with two challengers. As you can see, Joan Bennett and Kenneth Leary have a narrow edge over Miriam Abrudamos and Tony Heuschel. And so that's interesting,
For folks
too.
who don't know
because
where American Canyon is, it's just north of Vallejo in Napa County.
And it's almost down to Fairfield. Contrast that with St. Helena, where 100% of the vote is in, and two newcomers are also in.
They want to change.
So
wow.
this is the rarity where
100% reporting. That's it.
Yeah, 100% reporting, 100% turnover on the city council there,
Yes,
as far as
yes.
candidates seats that are open tonight. The other city, of course, is Napa, that has a city council election. There we see Scott Sedgley, the incumbent, retaining his seat with a strong turnout, but newcomer Doris Gentry has edged Mary Luros to claim the second seat on the
It's a
Napa
different
City
situation
Council.
in Napa. The Napa folks have, unlike Sonoma and Mendocino County, have not been happy campers.
No, it's an interesting city. Let me take just a moment here and look at the one Marin City Council
Well,
race
and
that
it's
we
not
have
much
to
of a
talk
race
about.
because Sam Rubin pulled out right after he filed. Apparently, he was persuaded after 2 days before the close of filing to declare. I don't think he thought it through very severely, because after 2 or 3 weeks, he said, "Thank you very much, but I'm not going to campaign." So Ray Withey is an incumbent. Two of the incumbents have retired. Linda Pfeiffer and Ted Theodoridis have retired. But Joe Burns and Joan Cox making a very strong run there. Nice vote for her, but they're going to win. 26%, I cannot believe that Sam Rubin, who has disavowed the office, is going to get elected.
Doesn't think he'll get elected, but he's getting a pretty strong showing, it seems.
Decent
Do
showing.
you think that's just sort of an anti-incumbent vote?
Well, sometimes it might be just people who think they know the name. You know, there is uninformed voters, and unfortunately some folks base their decision less than on, shall we say, less than deep thought.
Yeah, sometimes you think?
I think that happens.
I bet that's been known to happen. Quickly recapping up in Sonoma, Marianne Brigham is the leading candidate in that field, and quite a cluster around the second place seat there, only 2 seats open, 5 candidates bunched within just a couple of percentage points, as it has been for some time now. In Cotati, the incumbents look like a clean sweep, easily defeating the 3 challengers in the city council race there. And we are also looking at the race in Sebastopol. We hope to have some numbers for you there pretty soon. In Sonoma, still the same results that we've been seeing pretty much in that race. Sean McCaffrey and David Hagley are the top voters there, although it looks like that was narrowing a little bit. And Gary Plass and David Hagley, they're both showing 17% support. That is a closing of the gap that we saw there. Also very close for the 3rd seat on the Petaluma City Council between Gabe Kearney and newcomer Bill Warpert. Last time we checked, just about 160 votes separating the two of them. So that one looks like it could well go down to the wire.
Yeah, that's a surprise. Huh? You know, a result, by the way, the Marin County, not a final result, Marin County Superior Court judge race, there is a competitive race. Judge Fada Opal has retired and did not let the governor appoint because she just wanted to have the public do it. And Sheila Litbrow, who is a deputy county council, is running against deputy public defender Mike Cofrino. Litbrow is ahead right now, 52% to 48%. Close race, but we've got 42%. So you want to be Litbrow and not Cofrino in that race.
We've talked a couple times tonight about how people trying to handicap the races this evening have had their hands full. One of the people who tried to do that to some extent, I guess, is our next guest. Paul Gullickson is here from the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat, editorial director there, the man who gets to write all the endorsements.
Greetings, gentlemen.
Thank you for being with us.
Oh, absolutely.
So, what do you make of all this?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think you got 2 different stories going on. Obviously, the national level. You know, I wrote a column on Sunday that said, "Don't be surprised if Trump."
I read that column. Yeah.
And basically the issue was, and I wasn't encouraging the outcome.
No.
I was basically stating what I had said before, that this is by all effects an age of emotion more than anything. It's not reason, it's not anything else but just reaction. And Trump, I think, is more an emotion more than, I think people were responding to him in a way not because of who he is, but of what he represents. And I think there was a lot of anger out there, and I think there's some Brexit involved in this. I think there's some anti-globalization involved. I think there's some refugee statements. I think we're going to need to take a while and figure out what were the voters saying here, and that weren't in our area necessarily.
Well, certainly the Republican Party will never be the same. As I think David Brooks says, if Donald Trump wins, as he's winning, they will be the Donald Trump Party.
Right.
And the Democratic Party will probably the reaction will be to move to the left.
Well, I think there will be a reaction there, and the question was, how will people respond internally, including internally in the GOP, because we've never seen anything like this. I mean, he is not just opposed by the opposing party, he's posed internally. He's posed by the power structure in just about every institution in this country. People used to complain to me during this campaign that we didn't run enough columns and pro-Trump columns, and I said I can't find any. There were all the most conservative columnists: Charles Krauthammer, George Will, David Brooks. All of them didn't like him either.
The National Review devoted an entire issue to saying that Donald Trump was not conservative.
Right. Yeah, and so there are people who are attacking him from the right for many different reasons. He's not conservative enough, he's not Republican enough, doesn't capture the values. So I think there's going to be a lot of soul searching by a lot of people in positions of authority to figure out what happened here and what's going to happen in 4 years. I think the next campaign is going to start on Wednesday.
In an era where traditional media's influence is decreasing and social media's influence is increasing, it appears that we can't even agree on the facts.
Right.
And is democracy survivable when we can't agree on the facts? Or are we approaching the Civil War era again?
Well, I think that's a very good question, because I think we are in an era where we can't insulate ourselves so much from what everybody else, any contrary information, and then we can, through our social media, through our interactions, through what we accept, we can actually even subscribe to newspapers and only get certain information, certain points of view, which I think is not necessarily a great thing for our democracy, because I can't always tell you what I'm going to be interested in tomorrow's newspaper. So I think all these things are at play. It's a very personal, it's a very emotional response in that regard.
When we bring it a little closer to home in the California results, that hewed a little bit closer to general expectations.
On the propositions?
On the propositions and the candidates.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of surprises on that. I think what's interesting is here you have the national, you have really what was a referendum on not just Hillary Clinton, but the whole infrastructure, government infrastructure. Locally, we have pretty much voters saying they're voting most of the incumbents back in. The only exception on that would be the 5th district race, which is you have a long-time legislator, local elected official.
No incumbent.
And no incumbent, so to speak, but you certainly have a recognizable, in many ways, this was a referendum on Noreen.
Experience versus newcomer.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there was a kind of a pushback against the negative campaigning that went on both sides. I mean, there was a lot of money poured into that. I think what's remarkable in terms of the Santa Rosa City Council is that even with all the money that was poured into that, I mean, that when all is said and done, we're going to have over $500,000 spent on that campaign.
Remarkable.
I mean, it's just breaking all records. And yet the main beneficiary of that, Don Taylor, is running 5th right now, and looks like he's is not going to, once again, will be just one position out of the race.
In the Evans Hopkins race, might there be a national lesson in local elections? Maybe Hillary Clinton, 25 years in national politics, just taking all that stuff for 25 years was just too much build-up. And Noreen Evans, council member, Assembly, Senate, too much.
There's kind of a pushback against that. I mean, if you want to run, if you want to run for office nowadays, it seems like the message is don't have any prior experience. Yeah. Just have a lot of good talking points. Right. No enemies. No track record to run on. I think Noreen did have some things that hurt her. I think some of her positions on pensions hurt her in that race, and we had expressed that. But at the same time, she had a loyal following in the environmental labor community, and normally that would be enough to win a district like that. But this time, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case.
Speaking of pensions, when Carol Hart was talking with us a little while ago, she was dismayed that the Press Democrat had linked that issue to the parks issue and feel that that may have been the difference in that measure going down to defeat.
Yeah, that was a very hard one for us. I mean, we love parks. We feel that it would be a great benefit to the local parks, but at the same time, what it came down to was the county. It's not really it's not a revenue problem for the county. It's a spending problem, and we, if you look at how much money, extra money, has gone into to drawn down regular services, it's been like to the extent of $26 million a year for the last 10 years. So the question becomes not just, well, why is there not enough money for parks? Why has funding for the parks been flat for 10 years? Well, you really have to go back to what that is, and the pension costs, the additional pension costs that have come in, and now we're looking at the potential, based on this new pension report that came out, of an additional $53 million per year for the next 15 years. They really have to at least deal with that in an honest way, and they got this great pension report this summer. They disbanded the committee. They put the report on a dusty shelf, and they did nothing. And I think that really hurt them. I think if they had taken an honest look at that and set up the permanent committee, I think people might have been willing to make an exception in parks. It's still pretty close.
Well, it's not the first time that the linkage has occurred. I remember 2 years ago they had the two-county mosquito abatement tax.
Yeah.
And the big issue was, hey, wait a minute, you guys got high pensions here, and it lost.
And I think there's a subtext there on a lot of these issues, and I think particularly at the local level.
Well, I know you've got tomorrow's column in put to bed already. The next one may be the harder one, huh?
Yeah. Well, it was a tough. It does remind me of 2000. 2000, we went to bed at 10:30 with an editorial that said Gore wins, and I stuck around until I said, well, I just want to see some of the returns come in, and sure enough, it went south, and I had to rewrite that thing.
We were on the air until midnight that night.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
That was,
you remember that as much, and I had this feeling, just the Brexit factor, that this could go that route, and unfortunately.
Paul Gullickson, thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Good seeing you.
And appreciate it. We'll see what you have to say about things going forward.
Absolutely.
We're going to say very little bit about a few things that are still resolved, or won't be resolved probably before we finish up our show in just a couple of minutes. But let's quickly touch base with a couple of the issues that are still out there to be resolved. We want to, of course, see if there are some new numbers. Have we got any numbers from Sebastopol yet? Did they get lost all night long? That's one of the mysteries that we've been trying to sort out tonight.
They still use pencil and paper.
And so the late no, I guess the answer is no. We don't have any Sebastopol numbers. And that, of course, leaves the 5th District Supervisor race also pretty much in question, as well as perhaps the outcome for the parks measure.
Just two comments on that. When you get to a certain number, 50% of the votes are cast, things tend to set in a pace.
Mm-hmm.
So I hate to call races before they're called and they're not due, but I just also people shouldn't have undue hopes when that happens.
Yeah.
And once again, we face the inevitable, now Marin and Sonoma, slow count.
So slow counts and a few races hanging in the balance. A couple of city council seats with just a few votes between third place and out of the money. So those will probably not be on the news until tomorrow morning, if then.
I have a neutral column for tomorrow, which is already written, but Sunday's column is we start from scratch.
Yeah, so a lot of uncertainty as we go forward, sometimes because the results are known, and in some cases because the results are not yet known.
Well, yeah, this is a big night, and we've talked about local elections here in Marin and Sonoma counties, and that's as important because there's no form of government that affects you as much as local government.
Yeah.
Tonight, though, perhaps
Local
the national government's going to affect your life as well.
It's going to affect local government in some ways that we can't possibly anticipate, I fear.
Well, Bruce, this is 24 years for me. It's always been a pleasure. We started this out in 1992, and in the last couple of years, last decade, it's been an honor to work with you.
It's been a pleasure working with you, Dick.
And I know you're retiring.
It's bound to happen sometime, so next election maybe I'll just be watching you.
Well, you'll be our, we'll finally have off-county television ability. You'll be the man in Marin.
We'll see about that. With that, however, we come to the end of tonight's live coverage of today's election. I'd like to thank all the candidates and other guests who've been part of the program this evening for their time and their thoughts. We also send our special thanks to the many volunteers on the technical crew and the support team who make everything work smoothly behind the cameras and behind the scenes. So on behalf of all of them, my partner in politics here, Dick Spotswood, we thank you for watching tonight and for supporting public broadcasting here in the North Bay. That'll do it for our program. I'm
Thank
Bruce
you for
Robinson.
joining us for
Good
live
night.
2016 elections special coverage from KRCB, North Bay Public Media. For up-to-the-minute results, visit our election coverage website at krcb.org/election.
KRCB, made possible by viewers like you.
PBS NewsHour Weekend is kind of a natural next step. There's no shortage of news that's out there, but why do people come to us? To give them some context and analysis that they can't find somewhere else.